BBC presents My Word. And here to introduce the programme and the panel is Jack Longland.
My Word is a word game played by people whose business is words, and those taking part are Dilys Powell, Anne Scott James, Frank Muir, and Denis Norden. Here's round one. Try and test their vocabulary. 2 marks if they get the meanings right. And we begin with Dilys Powell. What's the meaning of the verb to dicker? D-I-C-K-E-R, to dicker.
To haggle, isn't it?
Yep. Trade by barter, to haggle, to chaffer. All words that are jolly hard, I think, but still, 2 marks you get. Denis Norden, what is an Abbacy?
Abbacy? No, is it to do with abbot?
Yeah.
Well, if a fellow's a prior, where he lives is called a priory.
Yeah.
But an abbot, you couldn't say he lives at an abbotry. No, that wouldn't do, because you couldn't have a bishop saying, yeah, it's his pad, because, the bishop said, if anybody wants me, tell them I've gone to the abbotry. So they called it Abbacy instead, so as to avoid confusion.
Exactly.
Yeah. No, it's not a place.
No, because he lives in an abbey. Isn't it the area of which he has control?
That's it.
Ah, it's the area of which he has control.
Yes, it's not.
It's a sphere of power.
Yes, that's much more like it. Yes, together you make it. 2 marks. It's the office, jurisdiction, or tenure of an abbot, just as a curacy would be the same for a curate. Abbacy. Anne Scott James, all is quite different. And what is a gallopade? G-A-L-L-O-P like gallop, and then A-D-E like so the end of lemonade. Gallopade.
Oh, a sort of mad, glorious dance.
Do you know which country it came from?
I should think those wild Hungarians.
Absolutely dead right. Well done. 2 marks. It's a lively dance which originated in Hungary. Frank Muir, what's a Wyandotte? W-Y-A-N-D-O-T-T-E. Wyandotte.
Well, if you're at a banquet and you've got a mouthful of claret and you sneeze, there are a lot of these all down your shirt front. It's also, we feel, a make of chicken.
It is indeed a make of chicken. It comes from the name of an American Indian tribe, the Wyandottes. 2 marks. Well, before we start round 2, I give each team a quotation for them to write down. And the 2 women members of the team, I hope, will go on studying those quotations, because at the end of the programme, I should ask them the source of the quotations. So, Dilys Powell and Frank Muir to start with. Your quotation is, I find the medicine worse than the malady. And Anne Scott James and Denis, here's yours. Old soldiers never die, they only fade away. And then at the end of the programme, I shall ask Frank and Denis to give me their idea of how these words came to be said or written. Well, the next round's about poetry or sometimes verse, and I give each member of each team a quotation and ask them for the following lines or line. 2 marks if they can correctly complete the quotation, and 2 more for naming its source, the author. Beginning with Dilys Powell. Should you ask me whence these stories, whence these legends and traditions... I'll do it quicker. That's right. Yeah.
Hiawatha. My learned colleague feels it's Hiawatha. By Longfellow.
Yes. All right, 2 marks it is. Hiawatha by Longfellow, but it goes like this, and it goes on and on and on. Should you ask me whence these stories, whence these legends and traditions, with the odours of the forest, with the dew and damp of meadows, with the curling smoke of wigwams, with the rushing of great rivers, with their frequent repetition, and their wild reverberations as of thunder in the mountains. Denis Norden. Frankie and Johnny were lovers. Oh, Lordy, how they could laugh.
actually heard it said that way.
Frankie and Johnny were lovers. They swore to be true to each other, true as the stars above. He was her man. Doing.
Absolutely right. Yes, jolly good.
I think it's a bit... Which version? You can go anywhere from there. According to the hour.
Origin, Denis?
Well, I would say it was folk, but...
Yes, you're dead right. You get your 4 marks. Frankie and Johnny were lovers. Oh, Lordy, how they could love. Swore to be true to each other, true as the stars above. He was her man, and he'd done her wrong. It's a classic American folk song. There are more than 200 versions, and I don't suggest that Denis should go on with any of them. It began life as Frankie and Albert, and it was the story of the murder of poor Albert, or Alan Britt, by his girlfriend, Frankie Baker, in October 1899. 4 out of 4.
Frankie and Albert.
And Scott James. We had intended you to be the next Prime Minister, but 3. The stocks were sold, the press was squared, the middle class was quite prepared.
Sort of Chesterton Belloc lot.
I would say either
Chesterton?
No, you got the wrong one.
Belloc.
All right, yes, I'll give you something for that. You don't remember the title?
Oh, I know. Charles Augustus Fortescue. The nicest chap.
No, he's a nice one. He's a different one. I think 2 out of 4. It's Lord Lundy by Hilaire Belloc, and it runs, we had intended you to be the next Prime Minister, but 3. The stocks were sold, the press was squared, the middle class was quite prepared. But as it is, my language fails. Go out and govern New South Wales. Well, now Frank Muir, and I apologise in advance because I just cannot do this accent at all, but Frank will have to forgive me. Where you going, you crowlin ferlie, your impudence protects you sairly, I canna say but ye strunt rarely.
Well, it's French. Lines fringed with apostrophes like that. Must be the poet Burns.
Yes?
Goes on, mijn lach doet That's how it concludes. That's 1 mark. It's not a wee timorous beastie.
Yes, it's a very, very wee, but not very timorous beastie.
It's a louse on the lady's head.
Yes?
No,
you're getting it right.
It is.
To a louse on the
yes,
that's right.
it
She scratches it with a...
Yes?
Yeah.
It's a louse on the lady's head.
All right, I think 3...
To a louse.
Yes.
If you'll pardon the expression, Jeff.
2.5. You can't complete it, I don't think.
No.
It's To a Louse by Robert Burns, and it runs, how away you going, you crowling fairly, your impudence protects you sairly, I canna say but ye strunt rarely, or gauze and lace, though faith I fear ye dine, but sparely on sicker place. Well, the next round is the origins and derivations of words and phrases. 3 marks if you can define the present meanings and then give the derivation of the ones I'm going to quote. Beginning with Dilys Powell, what is a limerick and why is it so called?
A limerick is a verse of doubtful purity, and it is called after somebody called Limerick, or who lived in Limerick.
But who invented the limerick?
Lear. No,
Yes.
was it
Lear?
Lear.
Yes. A nonsense verse in a particular metre, and this was popularised by Edward Lear in his Book of Nonsense. There was a young lady from Wilts who walked up to Scotland on stilts. When they said it was shocking to show so much stocking, she answered, then what about kilts? It's that sort of thing. But it wasn't given the name limerick till much later. And this was the sort of thing you did at Victorian parties. You see, each member in turn had to improvise a limerick. And then they sang at the end of each verse, the whole party together, we'll all come up to Limerick, which is rather the same as, that was a cute little rhyme, sing us another one now. And that was how, though it seems extremely improbable, these things became called limericks. Denis Norden, he who pays the piper calls the tune. Meaning and derivation.
Well, the meaning is that whoever foots the bill is entitled to give the orders.
Yes?
They used to pay pipers, presumably, to play tunes, and whoever paid him said, you'll your place isn't such a tune.
Yep. I think it's quite as simple as all that. I think you'll get your 3 marks.
Oh, it's a trick, you see. It makes sense.
The chap who stands the expense must have first say in how the money is spent. Some people derive it rather far-fetchedly from the Pied Piper of Hamelin, where he led the children of the city away and they were never seen again because the city didn't pay him his piper's fee. But Denis's explanation is the much more likely one. Piper or fiddler was playing, probably on the village green, and you paid for the tunes you wanted in the singing and the dancing. And Scott James, a peppercorn rent.
Well, it means a tiny nominal rent.
Yes?
And I should have thought that it comes from feudal times when the peasants used to pay their rent in pepper.
Yes. It is a purely nominal rent, meaning that the residence is almost rent-free to a particular person. The peppercorn wasn't worth much even then, but it was paid to the owner each year officially, so it meant that the owner to the property still had the official title to the property, and the tenant couldn't acquire squatter's rights. Peppercorn was a nut. Nowadays, when you're talking about a peppercorn rent, it's probably something like a penny a year or a shilling a year, but there were cases in medieval times when the payment was a peppercorn and was exacted. Otherwise, the tenant might be there forever. Frank Muir, a Toby man. T-O-B-Y-M-A-N, a Toby man.
End of the 17th and during the 18th century, the young man of good family fell into penury. He used to say to himself, Toby or not Toby. Which meant the choice of taking to the road or staying honest. The High Toby Spice was a high road, and a Toby man was a gentleman of the road with a highwayman.
Absolutely right.
A thief.
The High Toby was the high road, the Low Toby was a by road, so High Toby man on high roads, and rather lesser characters called footpads on by roads, and in Tinker's slang, Tobar is the high road. So Toby man is highwayman. 3 marks, well done. Well, the next round tries to find out what they were talking about. 2 marks, what were the writers or speakers concerned referring to when they said the following lines. An extra mark if you know who said or wrote them. So first, what was it about? And second, who was the author? Dilys Powell, it fascinates me. I can sit and look at it for hours.
Work?
Yes.
Work.
Yes, you're absolutely right. And the author, do you happen to know?
Oscar
No.
Wilde.
No, I think 2 out of 3. The quotation is, I like work, it fascinates me, I can sit and look at it for hours, I like to keep it by me, the idea of getting rid of it nearly breaks my heart. And it's by Jerome K. Jerome in 3 Men in a Boat. 2 out of 3. Now, Denis Norden, it's neither heaven nor hell, it is simply purgatory.
Work.
You could apply this to so many things, couldn't you?
Marriage, for instance.
Yes.
Marriage. I was going to say being engaged.
No, stick to the second
Marriage.
stage.
Yes.
Marriage it is.
Marriage.
Do you know who it's by? It's rather an unexpected person.
Unexpected person. The Venerable Bee.
Almost as unexpected as that, but not quite. 2 out of 3, I think. It's neither heaven nor hell, it is simply purgatory, said of marriage by Abraham Lincoln. Very surprising. And Scott James, an account mostly false of events unimportant, which are brought about by rulers, mostly knaves, and soldiers, mostly fools.
War, I should think, or history.
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 Yeah, absolutely right. It's transatlantic, this is. Does that help you at all?
Well, I was wondering, there's a book called The Devil's Dictionary by Ambrose Bierce.
That's it.
Is it?
Yeah, well done. 3 marks it is. This was said of history by the American story writer and journalist Ambrose Bierce. Frank Muir, it is a riddle wrapped up in a mystery inside an enigma. Churchill. It is. About what?
Sausage.
I doubt sausage. Russia?
Yes, well done. Jolly good.
You know that.
And now we come to the last round and go back to those quotations I gave the two teams earlier on the programme. 2 marks to this Powell. Can you give me the origin of your quotation? I find the medicine worse than the malady.
Dr. Johnson.
No, it's a lot earlier than that.
A lot earlier. Shakespeare.
Ha! Well, yes, you're
Back a bit. Forward a bit.
Forward a bit.
Left hand down.
The alternative author of Shakespeare?
Oh, Bacon.
I give you half a mark. It's pretty generous. In fact, it's this particular form. This is an oldish proverb, I think. In this particular form, I find the medicine worse than the malady, comes from Beaumont and Fletcher, who were Shakespeare's contemporaries, in a play called The Lover's Progress. But 20 years earlier or so, Bacon said, cure the disease and kill the patient, or he also said, the remedy is worse than the disease, which is the same proverb in slightly different shape. In this form, Beaumont and Fletcher. Now, Anne Scott James, the origin of your quotation, which was, old soldiers never die, they only fade away.
Well, I'm a bit stuck too, unless this is a song.
Yes, it's a song.
A song, an old song, an anonymous song.
But at what time was it popular?
Oh, First War?
Yes. It was a very well-known First World War song sung by soldiers, or allegedly so. Author, as far as I know, unknown. You get your 2 marks quite easily this time. Well, now I'm going to ask Denis and Frank to give me their explanation of how these quotations came into being. And on this occasion, the marks will go to whichever incredible explanation receives the longer amount of applause from the audience here in the theatre. So back to Frank Muir and his quotation, I find the medicine worse than the malady.
Off the start set, I could spit. It was this telegram I had this morning, you see. It's from my friend. When I opened it, well, my world tumbled. Terrible. Such a nice man, too. We were up at Oxford together about 6 Sundays ago. A lovely sunny day, and my landlord said, get out, Cyril, get out and get some fresh air. And I took the bus to Oxford. Awfully nice place, very nice indeed. And I met this man on top of the bus. His name was Donald Beaumont Fletcher, and he worked up in Oxford. He's up at Oxford, you know. He said he was modelling, so I said, what do you model, you know, raincoats? He said, no, I teach at a college there, you know, Eng Lit. And he wrote to me afterwards, and he said that I was wasting myself as a plasterer's mate. And he said that I had a kind of naive, primitive quality which I should develop and be a writer or something like that, you know, instead of slapping on the old plaster. So a week or two after I met Donald, I had this nice letter saying I must develop myself, you know, and it was signed, yours affect D. And he said, go out and develop yourself. Well, I went to the new theatre and saw a play. It was called The Wild Duck, and it was by this Norwegian gentleman, Henry Ibbotson. And it was all symbolic, and I realised, you know, you could tell stories through symbols. And I wrote this play. I called mine The Maladjusted Mallard. I want transform the whole theatre into the inside of a duck. Which, you know, you could do it. You could do it with foam rubber, you know, and plastic and stuff, and have the bits of the insides of the feathers sticking through, you see. And all the audience, we're all one end, and the actors at the other end, and they represent the food the mallard's just eaten, you see. And you sit there, we, society, sit there and watch all these things all sort of regurgitating and moaning around, you know. It's all a bit sad, but I think it represents a society. So I sent it to my friend Donald, you see, and said, what do you think of this? He wrote back and said, this is the most awful lot of tripe I've ever read. Yours affect D. Well, I didn't write anything for months. And then I went to another theatre, and I saw a smashing play. It's called The Bald-Headed Ballerina. It's by a fellow called Askew. Ian Askew, that's right, Ian Askew. And I couldn't understand a word they said, you see. And I realised what a terribly interesting form of theatre this was, you know. because you can't understand. I went to the pub live, and I got out all these plays by these chaps who write things you can't understand. And there was I read a play by Samuel Beckett called Ennui, and I read a play by Ennui called Beckett. And then I suddenly had this idea of this marvellous play, and I ran home and I wrote for hours. I was so excited. I didn't write the whole play, I'll be fair. I just wrote the first scene. And in my scene, communication, this thing of people not being able to understand, broke down completely. And they couldn't understand a blind word the other one said, because they just mattered inaudibly. See, and in my play, everyone just matters on the stage. I finished my muttering scene, and I sent it straight away to Donald in Oxford, and I said, what do you think of this? And a telegram came this morning. Oh, I was so excited. I thought he wouldn't spend, would he? Unless it was good news, I thought. And I opened it, and, I was so chagrined. It was depressing. I don't know where to put my face. It was from him, because he signed at the end, D, And do you know what he said? I'll read it to you. He said, I find the matter scene worse than the mallard, D.
Well, that's a perfectly appalling glimpse of the new wave in the theatre. So we pass on hastily to Denis Norden. If you remember, Denis's quotation was, old soldiers never die, they only fade away.
I would never have found out this particular secret of Mrs. Swinburne's had it not been for that day when I trod on her wrist. I must explain that Mrs. Swinburne is our office char, elderly lady. She scrubs the front step and makes the tea in the morning in the same water from the taster. But this particular day, I decided to walk to the office through Regent's Park, and I saw that there's this tree, and I saw an overhanging branch, and it was kind of a fit of Tarzanry. I leapt up to swing from it. Now, I don't know if you've ever leapt up to grasp an overhanging branch and found it was a crack in your glasses. But you do come down. You come down a bit heavily. And when I got to the office, I was still a bit dazed, which is why I didn't notice Mrs. Swinburne on the front step until I, as it were, came down heavily for the second time on her wrist. I said, I'm sorry I trod on your wrist, Mrs. Swinburne. She said, that's all right, pet. She said, it was, the only reason, she said, I did get a bit upset about it, it was because last Thursday I sold my body. What I didn't mention is she was 68. She said, I sold my body to science. I said, but selling your body to science, what for? So she said, 15 quid. She said, I did this, I read this bit in the newspaper, the Sunday newspaper, where about this hospital that was doing this research on obscenity. I said, you mean obesity? She said, that's it. That's it. She said, and as soon as I heard about it, said, I wrote off, and I said, what kind of body do you want, and how much will you give? And they said, we give 15 quid for it, providing the person is over 18 stone. She said, so I wrote back, and I said, all right, send the 15 quid. Now, I should point out, besides being 68 and only 5'2", Mrs. Swinburne was as thin as a rake and had as many bones as a kipper, you know. So I said, but if they said over 18 stone, how did... And at this, she had the grace to look shamefaced and said, I didn't actually go along there myself with to be weighed, I sent Ada, my friend. I said, Ada? She says, yes, she's weighs 22 stone in her iodine locket. She was the one who's weighed. So there it is. Now, the only other thing I haven't told you was that this happened 17 years ago. Mrs. Swinburne is still with us. Her friend Ada still goes along once a month and gets weighed in her stead. Mrs. Swinburne's looking younger every day, and I think she's going to live forever. And I do feel that it is a time when I should warn all hospitals and research laboratories who are advertising for volunteers to give their bodies to science, beware if an elderly charlady volunteers. Because from my experience, old-souled chars never die, and they only evade away.
Well, by your vote and by a narrow margin, Frank Muir wins the contest of the stories. That brings us also to a final score in which Anne Scott James and Denis Norden win by 5 marks from Dilys, Powell and Frank Muir, and it also brings to an end this edition of My Word.
In My Word, you heard Dilys Powell, Anne Scott James, Frank Muir and Denis Norden, introduced by Jack Longland. The programme was devised by Tony Shryan and Edward J. Mason and presented by the BBC. The BBC presents My Word. And here to introduce the programme and the panel is Jack Longland.
My Word is a word game played by people whose business is words, and those taking part are Anne Scott James, Dilys Powell, Frank Muir, and Denis Norden. Here's round 1 to test their vocabulary. 2 marks if they get the meanings of these words right. Beginning with Anne Scott James. Anne, what is a cellarette?
Well, something to do with drink, I should think.
Yes.
It's a piece of furniture which is used for holding drinks.
Yes, that's absolutely right. It's a teeny-weeny cellar, as you might say. A case or sideboard with bins and doors in the front for keeping bottles or decanters in a dining room, and not the kind that you lock up so that the parlourmaid can't get at it, which is called a tantalus. 2 marks. Frank Muir, what is a somerset?
A somerset. As far as I'm concerned, it's sandals, shorts, and a rather vulgar shirt.
I like that. It's not right, but it's jolly nice. No, what?
Somersault?
Is it a make of cart horse?
Somersault.
That's the Surrey with the fringe on top.
Saddle.
What kind of saddle?
Pack saddle.
Pack saddle.
1.5 marks. You're fighting your way through, but you're not going to get much further, I think. It's a padded saddle made especially for a one-legged rider. And it comes from Lord Somerset, who used one of these curious objects. 1.5. Dilys Powell, the meaning of the word farinose, F-A-R-I-N-O-S-E, farinose.
Witty.
In what sense?
Witty.
You're right, but in...
Witty.
Yes, but that isn't it to me a terribly descriptive adjective?
Well, it's made of wheat. It's kind of floury substance.
No, keep on that line. You're getting nearer to it.
Powdery.
That's it. It's mealy, sprinkled with powder. It can mean yielding flour, and it comes from the Latin farina, which is flour, pollen, starch, things like that. Denis Norden, what is a fardel? F-A-R-D-E-L, fardel.
Well, it comes in to be or not to be.
Yes, it does.
Fardel. Sounds like a far-off yodel, doesn't it? Over the other side of the mouth. It's for who would fardels bear to grunt and strain under a weary life, but that the dread of something after death, that undiscovered country from whose bourne no traveller e'er returned, puzzles the will.
Well done.
And it's a burden.
That's it. You've pretty well answered it by your quotation from Hamlet. What? It is a burden or a bundle of a pretty cumbersome kind, an old French word, diminutive from farder, which means a burden. 2 marks. Well, before we begin round 2, I give each team a quotation for them to write down, and the 2 women members of the team will, I hope, go on studying those quotations, because at the end of the programme, I shall ask them where the quotations come from. So, Anne Scott James with Denis Norden, your quotation is, our watchword is security. And Dilys, Powell and Frank, yours is the sound of music. At the end of the programme, I shall ask Denis and Frank to give me their ideas of how these phrases came to be said or written. So, on to round 2, which is about legend and mythology. 2 marks for correct answer. Anne Scott James, who are the myrmidons? M-Y-R-M-I-D-O-N-S, myrmidons.
I associate them with Homer.
Yes?
I associate them with Achilles.
Quite right. Very closely.
Now, they must have been the band of followers of Achilles.
Absolutely right. They were a semi-legendary race of Thessalians who followed Achilles' family, his father Peleus first, and subsequently they were his sort of battalion of troops in the war against Troy. Very fierce and warlike, and carried out orders without any compunction at all. And so it came to mean a hired ruffian or thug or servant, and then rather rudely about the police, the myrmidons of the law. 2 marks. Frank Muir, who was Deucalion? D-E-U-C-A-L-I-O-N, Deucalion.
Duke Ellington's foreign brother. Deucalion.
Came very early in the history of the
indeed.
world. Yes. He was practically an inventor. He threw something over his shoulder.
He did, yes.
He threw a rock over his shoulder.
Yes, what happened?
Just man and woman.
Yes.
2 marks.
Yes.
So if you'll give me who Deucalion's opposite number was, as it were, in Genesis, I'll give you 2 marks.
Oh, Noah.
Yes, all right, that'll do.
It was Noah.
You creep her with your 2 marks. Deucalion was the Greek Noah, the same legend turning up in Greek mythology, the son of Prometheus, and Zeus tried to destroy the human race, which he thought was degenerate, by causing a flood. And then Deucalion took his father's advice and built a large chest, a sort of tea chest, in which he and his wife, Pyrrha, escaped by floating, and they landed on Mount Parnassus after floating for 9 days. When he got there, he very prudently sacrificed to Zeus, who had caused the flood. He went and consulted an oracle, and he said, I want a bit of human race round me. And he was told by the oracle that if he would cover up his head, and Pyrrha do the same so he couldn't see, and then throw over his shoulders the bones of their mother, everything would be okay. Well, then they scratched their heads a bit about what were the bones of their mother, and rightly deduced that meant the stones in Mother Earth. All these stones that Deucalion threw turned into men, and all the stones that Pyrrha threw turned into women, and here we all are now. 2 marks. Denis Powell, who were the Harpies?
The Harpies were a very disagreeable race of people who, when you were eating,
yes,
they would arrive and sort of mess up the food.
Yes, and what did they look like?
Oh, they had wings, and they were very disgusting.
They didn't look entirely like birds. What else did they look like?
Oh, they must look like women as well.
That's it. Yes, that's good enough. That's right. They were the goddesses of the storm. They were supposed to be the people who abducted those who disappeared without trace, sort of professional kidnappers. Originally, in the first legend in Hesiod, they weren't unpleasant. They were rather beautiful women, but later, as in the story of the Argonauts, as Dilys quite rightly says, they were rather nasty-looking monsters, birds with women's faces and bodies, but birds' wings and claws and tails, and if you had a picnic, they mucked the whole thing up. Denis Norden, what was Arcadia?
It was a long, very difficult to read thing by Sir Philip Sidney.
Yes?
About this land where there's all woods and forests and everybody sings, follow, 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 and the many pipes of Pan.
Yes.
And what's that sort of place?
It was originally an actual place in southern Greece. It's the central plateau of Peloponnesus with mountains all round it, and the inhabitants being mostly rather simple characters, shepherds and hunters worshipping Pan. And it became a legendary place in poetry for a rustic, simple retreat where people lived in conditions of contentment and innocence, and so Arcady later became a sort of ideal rustic paradise. 2 marks. Next round is all about origins and derivations, and 3 marks if members of the team can get the present meaning right, and then give me the origin or derivation of these words or expressions. Beginning with Anne Scott James. Anne, the dole.
It's a free payment made by the state to those in need.
Yes. A particular kind of need.
If you're out of work, if you're unemployed
that's
and needy.
That's all right, unemployment relief. And what's the origin, though, of the word? What was it originally?
I can't think how far back it goes. It's not a Greek word, is it?
It goes back to Latin.
It doesn't come from dolor.
Yes.
It does?
Yes, it is.
It means sorrow or sadness.
All right. It was a name given to unemployment relief, though it was originally any kind of charitable distribution, and it was, I think, mainly coined during the 30s, the years of the Depression, when it was a pretty niggardly pittance. But it comes from the Latin word for sorrow or grief or despair. One's dole meant one's lot or destiny. 3 marks. Frank Muir, popinjay.
Popinjay, well, the present inference is foppish, overdressed.
Yes.
Somebody used to be called a macaroni dandy.
Yes.
And it's a kind of target for something or other.
Yes.
Sword thrusting.
No, it wasn't sword. You stay a bit further.
Arrows.
Yes.
Arrows.
Yes.
It's a target for arrows. It's a stuffed...
That's it.
Something.
Yeah.
Stuffed parrot.
A stuffed parrot used as a target for arrows.
Absolutely right. It now means, though it's not a word I use very often myself, an empty-headed or swaggering dandy or fop, as Frank said. But shooting at the popinjay was a sport at fairs. It was a stuffed parrot fixed on the top of a pole, and you shot at it with bow and arrow. 3 marks. Now, Dilys Powell, to add zest to something. To add zest to something.
Well, it means to give whatever you're doing or suggesting a kind of cheerful and exciting flavour.
Yes.
Add excitement to it and
Yes.
enthusiasm. Zest. It's something like lemon.
Yes.
It's lemon.
Yes. Now, what was that for?
If you put it on oysters, it makes the oyster shrivel up.
Quite right. To add zest now means to add piquancy or keen enjoyment or relish. But originally, zest was a French word simply meaning lemon peel or orange peel added to a drink or a dish in order to give it flavour. And hence, figuratively, it meant added flavour or piquancy to other things than eating or drinking. Denis Norden, table d'hote.
Table d'hote is the other menu. Depends whether you're paying the bill or being taken out. Table d'hote's what you have when you are paying, which is like the fixed menu, which is cheaper.
Yes.
That's the opposite of a la carte.
Yes. And originally, how did it come to mean this?
Well, it means the table of host.
Yes, that's it.
I think it was the stuff your host ate himself.
Yes,
Sure?
the stuff the host ate.
Yes, I think all right. 3. The fixed price lunch or dinner, as opposed to a la carte when the diner chooses from dishes from a longer list, and therefore, as Denis says, normally cheaper. But originally it meant exactly that, the table of the host. if a visitor came to your own house, then he normally took what you ate yourself, but also if you went to an inn in the old days, you'd normally take a meal with the host at his table, and it was the menu, as it were, picked by him and not by you. 3 marks. Well, the next round's initials or abbreviations. 2 marks. I want to know what the following abbreviations represent. And Scott James, PWD. PWD.
Oh, it was one of those things in the war, wasn't it?
Could be.
Secret spy stuff.
No.
Oh, it was very undercover. PWD, Political Warfare Department. It was, really.
Well, unless you've invented that, Anne, which you quite like. You catch me out completely on that. There is a more traditional thing.
Which we're not interested in.
No, I mean, all...
We were asked a simple question, we gave a
When
simple...
all one's chums were invalided out and came back unfit to fight, they all got shunted into this.
Room 46 at Bletchley or something.
Exactly that.
Mine didn't. Mine was shunted into the
10
Pioneers.
marks. Well, women were different. They were chosen for brilliance.
I suppose you say
I'm
you
going
never
to
had
give you your 2 marks. I don't, for the life of me, know whether it's accurate or not, but the more usual one is Public Works Department, which as far
Very flat, very flat.
as far as I know, originated in India with the Indian Civil Service. All right, we'll try again. Frank Muir, DMI.
It's the Droitwich Municipal Incinerator.
I lived at Droitwich.
Prove it isn't.
Yes, I can. I lived at Droitwich for 7 years, and I don't think they had one then.
We think it's the Director of Military Iniquities. Is that what you know? Intelligence? If there is any military intelligence, I'm sure it needs directing, and this is the gentleman who's charged with that.
It's Director of Military Intelligence, and what you say about military intelligence is squares with what Aldous Huxley said, who said there were 3 kinds of intelligence in descending order: human, animal, and military. Dilys Powell, PPS.
Postscript.
Yes, that's one of them. Do you know the other one? You can get your marks. There is another one, too.
Is there?
PPS, yes. In the political sphere.
Political
Parliamentary Private
Secretary, yes.
All right, the audience mustn't help. Mucks up the marking. Postscriptum, that is a further postscript after you've already sent your love to Aunt Nellie, and you think there's something else you want to say as well, PPS, or Parliamentary Private Secretary. 2 marks. Denis Norden, FRAD.
Fellow of the Royal Academy of something that begins with D.
That's it. That's 3 parts of the answer.
What? Drawing? No.
Move among the arts, you'll get it.
Dancing?
Yes. 1.5.
Remember
I
the
helped
audience.
you. Fellow of the Royal Academy of Dancing. Well, now we come to the last round and go back to those quotations I gave the 2 teams earlier in the programme. 2 marks, and if you can give me the origin of your quotation, our watchword is security.
Well, it's one of the great statesmen,
Yes?
and I have 2 in mind, but I think it was Pitt.
Yes? Any preference between the Pitts?
William Pitt, the elder. The elder.
Yes, all right, that'll do. Attributed to William Pitt, Earl of Chatham, though I can't help thinking it might have been said by almost any good Prime Minister.
Yes, absolutely.
Our watchword is security. Now, Dilys Powell, will you give me the origin of yours, which was The Sound of Music?
Well, it's a title thought up, I should have thought, by Hammerstein.
Yes. Sound of Music, a very successful musical by Hammerstein, Rogers writing the music, and has been turned into a film. 2 marks. Well, now I'm going to ask Frank and Denis to give me their explanation of how these quotations came into being. And on this occasion, the marks will go to whichever incredible explanation receives the longer amount of applause from the audience here in the theatre. So, back to Denis Norden with his quotation, our watchword is security.
I was called last week to the office of MI5 to meet the director of counter-espionage, M. I said, why have you called me here? He said, I won't beat about the bush, I'll tell you. He said, for some time now, information about our military secrets has been leaking to a foreign country whose name I am not empowered to tell you, but they've got a jolly good ballet company. He said, we know what happens. There's a network of spies throughout England, and weekly they telephone their information to one central clearinghouse for which they are given the telephone number, which changes every week. And what we want to know is how they get that telephone number. And we think we do know. He said, last week, a dead Armenian fig packer was fished out of the Thames, strangled, shot in the back, bludgeoned across the head, and a knife in what Shakespeare called the afternoon of the body. I said, you suspect foul play? He said, we're working on it. He said, clutched in his hand was a piece of paper on which was written, listen to my word. He said, underneath this was written 2 telephone numbers and the initials JL. We believe that Jack Longland is using the program My Word every week to transmit the telephone number which this network of spies rings. He said, now we want you to help us. I said, what do you want me to do? He said, find out in what way he is transmitting this number. Well, Jack Longland, I sat up all night on the problem, and suddenly I found a very interesting fact. The quotations which you gave me for the story, the whole of this series, have one rather strange thing in common. One was, most men lead lives of quiet desperation by Thoreau. And the other one was, O Wild West Wind, Our Breath of Autumn's Being by Shelley. Quickly I dashed to the phone, checked against the phone, then rang up M. I said, I've got it. I've broken the code. I know how he does it. He said, how? I said, I always get a quotation whose author has 7 letters in his name. He said, but surely it isn't up to Jack Longland to pick the quotation. I said, by golly, you're right. And then I remembered the man who compiles the quotation, the man called Edward J. Mason. And I recalled there was a scandal about him some years ago. He'd been picked up in a public telephone box dialing swear words. The BBC had hushed it up, of course, and nobody knows, but obviously what had happened was that Longland had got onto him and was now blackmailing him into putting into the script whatever quotation he so desired. Every author I get has 7 letters. Obviously, what happens is the agents all listen. They go to the telephone and they dial on the London Exchange that name. I said, do you remember the 2 telephone numbers that you fished out of the river on that man's piece of paper? He said, yes. I said, one week I had a quotation by Thoreau. Dial Thoreau on a London telephone exchange, you get Thornton Heath 7328. He said, by golly, that's one of the numbers. The second one was by Shelley. Dial Shelley on a London telephone exchange, you get SHE and the rest of the numbers. Shepherd's Bush 5539. He said, that was the other number. He said, we've got him. We've got him. This week, we will switch the quotation, which is what we did. Edward J. Mason broke down, confessed, cried like the weakling he was, and we substituted this quotation. Agents all over the country have dialed up Chatham, the Earl of Chatham. Chancery Lane, 8426 on your dial, Jack. Headquarters of MI5. Right, men, you may take him away. I think it's a mark of M that he chose the quotation. Security is our watchword, Jack Longland.
had nothing to say, at least until I consult my solicitor. And we go on to Frank Muir, and his quotation, if you remember, was the sound of music.
For the next 30 or 40 minutes, the microphone is mine. And I'm not going to tell you a story. Instead, I'm going to seize this opportunity to broadcast to the world the true facts, to refute this foul and vicious calumny which has been spoiling my life. This vile rumour that ever since the middle of my marriage service, I've been drunk. Absolutely untrue. And yet I have this awful thing hanging over me. They say, Muir, he's a drunk, a lush. He's always at it, you know. And these things just sort of happen to me, and I'd like to explain why this rumour has been spread, and that it's wrong. It is just a rumour. When I arrived at my village, I mean, just after I was married, about 15 years ago, the second day I was there, I was making an occasional table in the shed, and I was using some glue, some impact glue, to glue the thing together, and I was clamping it together with my knees, and I must have got a little glue on the inside of both the knees of each other, because when I straightened up and clamped my knees together, they were fast lodged. So I reached for the bottle of methylated spirits. None. Across the other side of the road, there is an oil and colour merchant's which sells methylated spirits. So I staggered and weaved, my knees locked together, across the road. Well, half the village, of course, had to be waiting for a bus there, and they were all muttering and turning away and hiding the children's eyes. And even a woman with a spaniel, I noticed, draped the spaniel's ears over its eyes. See this figure. I tried to reassure them. I waved the bottle at them to explain it. It just happened to be an ordinary whiskey bottle, you know, that one... But they just think these things, you know. But it all came about because of this awful thing that happened at my wedding, you see. Because you know, what is the symptom of a drunk, of a man who's over-imbibed? He gets hiccups, that's it, isn't it? You people, I can see, your hiccups are probably gentle and mild. A little sort of genteel hic, hic. Rather like a little sort of bird hopping. But mine is a sort of deep, rending thing, cataclysmic, which comes right up from the chest. It's rather like two rhinoceroses severing a linen sheet. And it happens and it rings round. Well, I get hiccups if I run a mile and then take a sip of iced lager. It doesn't happen very often. But what gives me hiccups is nervous tension. Remember the marriage service? When it came to that bit about all my worldly goods I thee endow, suddenly my nerves got the best of me. And out it came. And that's really what's given me this terrible reputation, right from my wedding and ever since. Because, as he said, with all thy worldly goods I thee endow, and I repeated it, suddenly round the church it rang, the sound, it ricocheted off the stained glass windows. And you know what the sound was. It was the sound of Muir's hic!
By your vote, Frank Muir just wins the contest of the two stories, and his team, that is Frank and Dilys Powell, win the entire contest by 2.5 marks. And that also brings to an end this edition of My Word.
In My Word, you heard Dilys Powell, Anne Scott James, Frank Muir and Denis Norden, introduced by Jack Longland. The programme was devised by Tony Schreian and Edward J. Mason and presented by the BBC. The BBC presents My Word. And here to introduce the programme and the panel is Jack Longland.
My Word is a word game played by people whose business is words, and those taking part are Anne Scott James, Dilys Powell, Frank Muir, and Denis Norden. Round one tries to test their vocabulary. 2 marks if they get the meaning of these words right. And we begin with Dilys Powell. Dilys, I want to know the meaning of the word acardiac. A-C-A-R-D-I-A-C, acardiac.
It ought to mean without a heart.
It means exactly that. Without a heart. It's not an emotional term, it's a physiological one. I mean, if you're born without a heart, you don't last very long.
I was going to say, yes.
2 marks it is.
But it's fun while it lasts.
Yes. Now, Denis Norden. Denis, what is chow chow? C-H-O-W with a hyphen and then another one.
Chow chow. Well, it sounds like 2 Italians saying goodbye. It's what you get in Chinese restaurants. I don't know what it is, because I never get that far. Of course, you get hungry an hour afterwards, but I never get as far. It's one of the
just read
desserts.
the menu and walk out.
Yeah. It's in the dessert part of it.
Yes? It's made normally of orange and ginger happens quite a lot, I think, in Chinese restaurants, and that's it. Anne Scott James, what is a zingaro? Z-I-N-G-A-R-O.
Oh, that's another exotic word. It's a gypsy.
Quite right. And when it happens in the plural and plays cricket?
Zingari.
Thank you very much indeed. 2 marks. It's Italian for a gypsy, and this wandering cricket club, the Gypsies, call themselves I Zingari. Frank Muir, what is variolation? V-A-R-I-O-L-A-T-I-O-N. Variolation.
I'll tell you what it is, it's a rotten word. It's a rottenest word I've heard for quite a few weeks, actually. And I thank you for it. Variolation. Oh, ation is the sort of process of something happening.
Yeah.
Like ovation is the process of laying eggs.
Left out a syllable there.
Variolation is golf. It's knocking a ball into various holes.
Would it
Variolation.
Would it help, Frank, if I said
No.
variola? Does that help?
No.
Spottedness. Try spottedness.
Oh, a spottedness, as in variegated privet.
Yeah. You're getting much better, yes.
Well, appertaining to things spotty. Present
All right.
company except.
Half a mark. We're not very close, we give you half a mark. Variolation is inoculation with smallpox virus, variola being the name for smallpox, just like rubella is the name for German measles. Well, before we begin round 2, I'm going to give each team a quotation for them to write down, and the 2 women members of the team will, I hope, go on studying their quotations, and then at the end of the programme, I shall ask them for the source of the quotations. So, Dilys Powell and Frank Muir, yours is, I am monarch of all I survey, and Anne Scott James and Denis, yours is, ne'er cast a clout till May be out. And at the end of the programme, I shall ask Frank and Denis to give me their ideas of how these phrases came to be said or written. And so on to round 2, which is, I think, a pretty easy round about nursery rhymes. 2 marks if you get them right. Dilys Powell, what were the names of the 2 little dicky birds who sat upon the wall?
Peter and Paul.
Absolutely right. 2 little dicky birds sat upon a wall, one named Peter, one named Paul, and it finishes up, fly away, Peter, fly away, Paul, come back, Peter, come back, Paul. I used to play it with ink stains on my nails, like a sort of rather exotic nail varnish.
How interesting. No, you play it with a little bit of paper stuck on the end of your finger with spit. Like that. We do that.
We're both passé. It's no good, Frank. They play it with skipping ropes now, so my daughter tells me.
You can't play it with...
They play with drugs now.
That's probable.
Fivers, yeah. A bit torn off a £5 note, they do.
All right, back to Denis Norden. Who agreed to make the shroud for Cock Robin on his death?
Well, this could have been Paul, right?
No. Wait a bit. No, I haven't got the illusion.
I'm being very elusive.
You are, terribly. Beating me,
It was
all ends up.
It was a beetle.
Oh, yes. Well done. Absolutely.
As I said the beetle with my thread and needle. Yay, yay.
Yes, I wish I'd give you a bonus mark. It's jolly good. 2 marks. Who'll make the shroud? I said the beetle with my thread and needle. I'll make the shroud. And all the birds of the air fell a-sighing and a-sobbing. Anne Scott James. Who was it who went to bed with his trousers on and with one shoe off and one shoe on?
My son John.
Mm-hmm. He said other things too. Do you remember them?
Diddle diddle dump.
I think my son John
went to
bed with his trousers on.
That's all right. Good enough. 2 marks. Diddle diddle dumpling, my son John went to bed with his trousers on. There is in Mother Goose, it's stockings, but it's trousers I think is more usual or unusual. One shoe off and one shoe on. Diddle diddle dumpling, my son John. Now back to Frank Muir. Old Mother Hubbard went to the cupboard to fetch her poor dog a bone, and as you know, the cupboard... No, I don't want the next bit. And as you know, the cupboard was bare. She then went to various places in order to get food and drink. And each time she got back, the dog was doing something different. And this is a bit...
We know what dogs are. She probably gave him water at one stage.
No. This is the bit I want.
What do you want, Jack? Come on, out with it, man.
She took a clean dish to get him some tripe. And what happened when she came back? She took a clean dish to get him some tripe.
That's easy. He was smoking a pipe.
Oh, don't be silly, it's a
He
dog.
was smoking a pipe.
I want to stick to that.
He was smoking a pipe.
When she came back, he was smoking a pipe. 2 marks. So then we have a round about origins and derivations. 3 marks as a maximum. If the team can define the present meaning and then tell me the origin and derivation of these words or phrases. Dilys Powell, pronto.
Pronto? Origin?
I know this.
What it means that...
I can help you.
Go on. Hazard a guess. Go on.
We think it's Spanish
Yes.
for quick.
Yes. Just that.
And bistro is Russian for quick. And you just use that, presumably via Mexico into America.
Yes, and how to here to this country?
Or via Wild West films, I think.
I think as near as anything, yes. All right, that's 3. Slang, meaning quickly at once or get a move on, like Italian subito, which means the waiter will come within the next half hour. And it is a Spanish or Mexican word. It came through Westerns and I think through Americans in the last 2 wars. Over here. Denis Norden, quagmire. Quagmire. Quagmire.
Well, it's a sort of swamp or marsh.
Yes. And originally?
Originally, it was a sort of swamp.
No
it wasn't porridge or anything like that. It may have been. Mire is mud.
Yes.
And quag is the noise that your shoe makes when you take it out of a swamp. You go quack, quag.
Oh, I think it's the noise the frog makes.
Or a frog in there. It's good.
Quack, quack.
Quack, quack, quack.
Now, I think you're on the wrong tack.
It's frog mud.
I think this describes not sound, but what actually happens. Not in question of sound.
Quag is a Spanish for to sink into. Quagare,
but
to sink in.
Dennis, when you step on it, what's the first feeling that you get?
Revulsion.
I was trying so hard.
What's the first feeling you get?
A marshy or boggy stretch of land, but what it really means is a quaking bog. And quagmire originally was quakemire. It meant that when you started stepping on it, you get terribly frightened because it starts shivering under your feet. Land that quaked and trembled underfoot because it had no foundation but mud or bog. 1.5. Anne Scott James, agnostic.
An agnostic means now somebody who doesn't know. It's usually a religious, used of religion.
Yes.
Somebody who says that they do not know if there is a God or isn't a God.
Yes, and comes from, and who used it first?
Well, it's a Greek word. How far back do the agnostics go? They go back to Socrates, I should think.
The word does, but I think the description of the chaps is very, very much more recent.
Much later. What's a Christian word?
2 out of 3 for knowing it's Greek and for knowing what it means now. Someone who argues that as there is no material phenomenon to prove that there is a God or a life after death, they reserve judgment on the matter because they don't know. And agnostos means sort of not known. That's the Greek original. But it was coined in respect of religious doubt by Huxley, Professor Huxley, in 1869, to describe this particular mental attitude of people who find it difficult to believe implicitly in things that couldn't be proved physically and materially. And it probably harks back to that bit in the New Testament of St. Paul, the altar to the unknown God. Agnostic. Frank Muir, in the gods. Or up in the gods, if you like.
Up in the gods means being in the upperest of the upper gallery in a theatre.
And why?
Because when that kind of theatre, music hall theatres, were first built in the Victorian times, they were always liberally decorated with cherubs and deities.
Absolutely right.
In gilt and blue and plush.
Wonderful. The top gallery of the theatre, and these used particularly at Drury Lane, which be embellished with paintings and carvings of various gods, and therefore the people at the top were nearest among the gods. And the French had a similar expression, describing it as paradis, as in the film Les Enfants de Paradis.
Is the pit the opposite of the gods, then?
I've always assumed so, unless it's something like the bear pit, you see, when you're bull baiting or bear baiting.
Yes, probably was.
Well, I don't know how to describe this round, but everybody knows that the wife of a prince is a princess, normally, and of a duke a duchess. I want to know the title of the wives of the following people. 2 marks. Dilys Powell, an earl.
Countess.
Countess it is. She could also be the wife of a count, but we don't have that as a title in this country. 2 marks. Denis Norden, a marquess or marquis.
Marchioness.
Yes. Anne Scott James, a baronet. Wife of.
She's a lady.
Normally. Yes, she used to be called Dame. That was an alternative title. Dame with her Christian name, Dame Mary so-and-so, but normally now lady. And this is nice because this is the lowest hereditary titled order, and it was entirely started in order to raise money by James I. For £1,000 down, you could become a baronet. Nowadays, we don't do it in quite such a vulgar way. And Frank Muir, Maharaja.
Maharaja. Maharani.
Yes, quite right. The wife of a Maharaja is a Maharani. The Maharaja is a great king, and a Maharani is a great queen. Hindustani. Well, the next round's about George Bernard Shaw. And he wrote a good many epigrams and witticisms in his time, sometimes on very controversial topics. I want to know to what he was referring when he made the following comments. 2 marks again, if we get it right. Beginning with Dilys Powell. It is popular because it combines the maximum of temptation with the maximum of opportunity.
Marriage.
Yes, quite right. You get your 2 marks. Marriage is popular because it combines the maximum of temptation with the maximum of opportunity. Denis Norden. It ends in logical completeness when nobody is allowed to read any books except the books that nobody can read.
Well, I think it's some form of censoring books.
Yes, that's it. Well, there's one word for it.
Censorship.
Quite right. Censorship ends in logical completeness when nobody is allowed to read any books except the books that nobody can read. 2 marks. He also said assassination is the extreme form of censorship. That was in a different bit. Anne Scott James, it is always wrong. It never solves a problem without creating 10 more.
Ministry of Transport.
Wrong ministry.
Science.
Yes,
Science.
You're absolutely right. 2 marks. Frank Muir, it's a wonderful thing. What a crime to waste it on children.
Television.
Let's get
It's a quality.
Patience.
Is it being young?
Yes. One word again.
Youth.
Absolutely right. Youth is a wonderful thing. What a crime to waste it on children. 2 marks. Everybody scored full marks in that round. Jolly good. And now we come to the last round and go back to those 2 quotations I gave the teams earlier in the program. For 2 marks, Dilys Powell, can you give me the origin of your quotation? I am monarch of all I survey.
It's a poem
Yes?
which is supposed to be about Alexander Selkirk,
Yes?
who was the origin of Robinson Crusoe,
Mm-hmm. Written by?
something like Cooper.
Yes, quite right. You get to 2 marks. I'm monarch of all I survey, my right there is none to dispute. Lines attributed or supposed to be written by Alexander Selkirk, chap who was wrecked on Desert Island, from whom the story of Robinson Crusoe was taken, but actually written by William Cooper. But it ended up rather more sadly. Better dwell in the midst of alarms than reign in this horrible place. He didn't really like his island. And Scott James, the origin of your quotation, ne'er cast a clout till May be out.
Well, these smug little couplets are usually proverbs. I think it's just a proverb.
Yes, traced, I think, originally to one country, though obviously copied in others. It is a proverb.
Well, clout is a tremendously English
Yes, it is, in
Anglo-Saxon
this
word, isn't it?
Proverbial, yes. 1.5, I think. What I was trying to get out of you was that, as far as we know, it first started in Spain in 1627, Correas. Don't leave off your coat till May, putting it quite straightforwardly. And then it comes in Fuller's collection of proverbs in 1732, leave not off a clout till May be out. And it doesn't occur in its present form, ne'er cast a clout till May be out, until the 19th century. Well, now I'm going to ask Frank and Denis to give me their explanations of how these quotations came into being. And on this occasion, the marks will go to whichever incredible explanation receives the longer amount of applause from the audience here in the theatre. So, back to Frank Muir with his quotation, I am monarch of all I survey.
Recently, it's suddenly dawned upon me that the old juices aren't working as well as they should. The fact is, I had a dreadful warning. I had an intimation of mortality the other day. Suddenly, I was sitting by the side of the bed, and suddenly I couldn't get up. I had a terrible burning pain in my left breast. Actually, what had happened was I was thinking of something else, and I'd attached my left part of my braces, which has a clip end, to the top of my left sock. This, of course, stretched the elastic, which was rather old anyway, and was sort of wrinkled. But then I released it, and the elastic contracted. It closed in. You know those 2 brown pimples we chaps have either side of our chin? I don't know quite their purpose. I use mine for steadying an ashtray when I'm smoking in bed, but the closing up of the elastic had trapped my little left pimple, and that was the pain. But it did cause me to wonder, really, how much longer I got to go. And I began to worry, and I suddenly realized it was time. I have possibly 40 or 50 years only ahead of me, and it was borne upon me that it's time I set my house in order. And there's 1 or 2 rather disgraceful things I've been guilty of in the past, and I'd like to tell you about them and get them off my conscience. The team have been receiving letters from famous people recently, the last few weeks. Denis Norden has been receiving some from Val Parnell, saying, Dear Den, smashing show, lovely boy, lovely. But if I were you, I'd let Frank Muir win a bit more. It'll gain you sympathy, and as we in show business know, sympathy is a great thing for a great comic like you to have. Yours with love, Val. Anne Scott James received a number of letters from Monica Furlong, who was a sister journalist. The letters have said that, Dear Anne, love your show, but if you'll just take a tip from me, and I do hear it quite a lot, don't get them all right. Let Frank Muir get a few right, and it'll make you look soft and feminine. Yours, I, Monica. And Jack Longland's been receiving letters from Professor Asa Briggs, the lecturer and historian on broadcasting. Dear Jacko, love your show. Keep it up, son. But if I might make a suggestion, give Frank Muir easier words. This will gain you sympathy. Yours ever, your old pal, Asa. Dilys Powell has been receiving letters from Faye Compton. Dear Dilys, as a leading lady, take an advice from me and let the man win. Don't prompt him audibly. Let him have the impression that he's the one who's getting the answers. Yours, I, Faye. Ladies and gentlemen of the team, they didn't write to you, Monica, Val, and Asa, and Faye. No, I am not only Hugh, I am, in the words of Alexander Selkirk, I am Monica, Val, Asa, Faye.
All right, back to Denis Norden and his quotation. Ne'er cast a clout till May be out.
If you can cast your mind back to when this was first propounded, they said it came from the Spanish. Do you remember? The chap said came from the Spanish. The chap's got all the answers in front of him. Which is ridiculous, because May in Spain is marvellous. You can walk about with your cufflinks off. So obviously, when they say about whichever of the two have the more incredible explanation, and so, I mean, is there anything more incredible than that explanation? Obviously, that proverb did not come from the Spanish. Neither, I venture to submit, did it come from the English. Because, see, what it says is, ne'er cast a clout till May is out. It says, in effect, don't leave off winter underclothing till the 1st of June. Now, anybody who's lived for any length of time in this sceptred isle knows that will bring only one result: pneumonia on the 2nd. I'm right. Am I not right, as thinking men and women? Obviously, if you are an Englishman, you daren't even leave off your earmuffs until about August. And it is possible that this proverb did, in fact, come from the French, who did place the time of leaving off, déshabiller in French, dishabille in English, until August. The original, you see, the word for August in French is A-O-U-T. Oh. As Mark Twain said, the foreigners always spell better than they pronounce. So that this proverb could have come from the French. They say, don't leave your clothes off till August, or ne cast des clothes till maybe out. But that's only a theory and not one that I subscribe to. There is a body of opinion who says that it comes from Finland, actually, which would mean that it was finished before it started. But my particular belief is that it comes from the German. And it comes from a legendary German folk figure called Till Eulenspiegel. Till Eulenspiegel was a peasant round about the 14th century who played merry pranks and japes, which, even if you read them today, you could absolutely die from boredom at them. And this so the legend has it, one day this merry prankster was out, and there happened to be a German Hausfrau called Alice Wunderland, who was doing the washing up at the window, or der waschen up aus der Winden. I won't translate everything as I go along, because it's a bit tedious. And she threw out of the window her wet dishcloth, or clout. And as Till Eulenspiegel happened to be passing, it hit him right in the Augenhöhlen, which, of course, I obviously don't need to translate. And he resolved, in revenge, to play a merry prank upon her, which he did, and the merry prank involved casting her mother naked into a vat of boiling sauerkraut. And this gave rise to two very popular German proverbs. The first one is alles ist kaputt, and the other one is the injunction which all German housewives heed to this day: ne'er cast a clout till may be out.
Well, the result of the story contest is that Frank Muir just wins from Denis, and that brings us to a final score in which Dilys Powell and Frank Muir get home by 5 marks from Anne Scott James and Denis Norden, and that also brings to an end this edition of My Word.
In My Word, you heard Dilys Powell, Anne Scott James, Frank Muir and Denis Norden, introduced by Jack Longland. The programme was devised by Tony Shryan and Edward J. Mason and presented by the BBC. The BBC presents My Word. And here to introduce the programme and the panel is Jack Longland.
My Word is a word game played by people whose business is words, and those taking part are Anne Scott James, Dilys Powell, Frank Muir, and Denis Norden. Round 1 tries to test how many words they know. 2 marks if they get the meanings of these words right. Beginning with Anne Scott James. Anne, what is a tuft hunter?
Well, it means somebody who chases important and famous people. Isn't it the same as Mrs. Leo Hunter? She was an example of a tuft hunter.
Absolutely right. 2 marks. A toady, that's rather a word that's fallen out of the language. Person who makes a practice of seeking the company and society and behaves obsequiously towards titled and important people. And it comes from the fact that at one time at Oxford and Cambridge, noblemen's sons, titled undergraduates, wore a tuft or a gold tassel on their college caps to distinguish them from the commoners.
Or snobs.
Or snob, yeah. If you like. 2 marks. Frank Muir, what is a petroleur? Petroleur. Petroleur.
It's, oh yes, it's the Irish for Gaelic wolfhound. No, it's French, isn't it? Petroleur. 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 Voleur is a thief.
Yeah.
pétroleur. Somebody who siphons from the petrol tank with a tube.
Okay, he might have done that. What's he do with the petrol when he's got it?
Spits it out. It tastes terrible. No, I'm wrong. I lie. I tell a lie. Petrol is French for paraffin.
He blows up with it.
Pétroleur is the paraffin hour. Oh, he's an incendiarist using petrol or paraffin, I would have thought.
Yes?
He's exploding things.
Yes, he's an incendiarist, a fire bug.
Yes, that's better. You get your 2 marks. He's a chap who sets fire to things, buildings, prime ministers and so on, by using petroleum. Now, Dilys Powell, the meaning of the word digitigrade.
Digitigrade. Taking steps.
Yeah. A particular kind of step.
By digits.
Yes, the digits is the important thing.
Digits. Walking on your hands.
Not walking on your hands. You're getting very near.
Walking on your
Or
fingers.
your feet. Walking on your fingers.
Walking on your fingers.
Walking on your fingers.
Hands. Walking on your hands.
Walking on your hands. It isn't walking on your hands. Walking on your fingers.
Walking on other people's hands.
One out of
toes.
2. 1 out of 2. It means walking on the toes without placing the whole of the foot or the heel on the ground. And some animals do this. I think the great sloth does
Yes,
it.
it does. On his knuckles.
And some carnivores do it too. They never put the main part of the foot on the ground at all. They're always on tiptoe. Denis Norden, I've got a much harder one for you. What is a bald money? Baldmoney. Bald money.
Bald money. Well, bald money is when a man dies without any family. When he leaves his money, it's called bald money, you see, because there's no heirs.
Oh, very good.
Have you been writing the riddles for Christmas crackers?
You get away from
Pie slapper, isn't it?
Get away from an affecting story and become a bit more botanical. It might help.
Bald money botanical. Oh, it's the name of a botanical thing.
A flower, for
A flower, such as a flower, or plant, or shrub, or herb.
Yep. Bald money is a yellow-flowered, umbelliferous plant, and right back in the 16th century it was a word used for the gentian, which doesn't grow all that often in England, except in Teesdale. All right. Well, before we begin round 2, I'm going to give each team a quotation for them to write down, and the 2 women members of the team will, I hope, go on studying those quotations, because at the end of the programme I shall ask them where those quotations come from. So, Anne Scott James with Denis Norden, here's yours. Just like the ivy, I'll cling to you. And Dilys Powell and Frank Muir, your quotation is, the rank is but the guinea stamp. And then at the end of the programme I shall ask Denis and Frank to give me their ideas of how these words came to be said or written. Next round is Shakespearean. I want to know of what or whom Shakespeare was referring to when he wrote the following lines. 2 marks and an extra mark, making 3, if you know which character actually spoke the lines. Beginning with Anne Scott James. Age cannot wither, nor custom stale her infinite variety.
Well, it's of Cleopatra.
Yep. Said by?
I suppose Antony. Was that too easy?
This sort of chorus character in Antony.
Female?
No.
Not one of those.
Quite difficult. Eno.
Yeah,
Enobarbus.
right. Yes, quite right. Frank Muir. He was a man, take him for all in all. I shall not look upon his like again.
Hamlet.
Yes, speaking of?
His dad.
Yes, 3 marks it is. Now, Dilys Powell. How like a fawning publican he looks, I hate him.
Said by Shylock.
Yes, quite right. There.
Merchant of Venice.
Yes, it's Shylock. When Bassanio is about to introduce Shylock to Antonio, the merchant of Venice, and he says, how like a fawning publican he looks, I hate him, for he is a Christian, but more for that in low simplicity he lends out money gratis and brings down the rate of usance here with us in Venice. 3 marks. Denis Norden. Away, you scullion, you rampallion, you fustillarian, I'll tickle your catastrophe.
Yes, it's a favourite crossword puzzle. I'll tickle your blank. Makes it even look worse. It's Falstaff.
Yes.
Says it.
About?
Mistress
Yes.
Quickly.
Yes. In
Henry the Fourth.
Yes. All right, we won't bother about which
Part.
No, it was actually between part 1 and part 2 in the commercial.
Well done, Dennis. 3 marks. Yes, this was spoken to Mistress or Hostess Quickly by Falstaff in Henry IV, Part 2. And she was very angry with him because she was trying to get him arrested for all the money he owed her on tick for the drinks that he'd had. And immediately afterwards in comes the Lord Chief Justice, and she tries to get him committed to prison. 3 marks. Next round is the origins and derivations and present meanings of words and phrases. 3 marks if you can define the present meaning and then give me the origin and derivation of the following words. Anne Scott James, your word is sabotage. Present meaning, derivation.
Well, it means to sort of stick a bomb under something.
Yeah, that's
Will
fine.
that do?
Yes, it'll do.
Blow something up, which is going nicely and smoothly.
Yes. And originally?
Can't think what a sabo... I can only think of a sabo the shoe, but it can't come from that, can it?
That's a good start.
Is it? Well,
Yeah.
a sabo is a sort of clog.
Yes.
Oh, yes, in the 16th century, people used to, when they were sitting quietly on a stool, when a woman was, a man would come up and kick the stool from under her with his sabot, hence the phrase.
It's a very pretty picture.
Saboteur and sabotage. Okay?
Not quite, but 2, I think. Not 3. As Anne Scott James says, it's any act which is designed to destroy and render ineffective machinery or bridges, like the Luddites who tried to sabotage the Industrial Revolution, or metaphorically, stopping attempts to settle something peacefully, putting a spanner in the works. There are 2 possible origins. One is that some French workers at some time used these heavy wooden clogs to kick and damage machinery they didn't much like. The other explanation is that during the great French railway strike in 1912, the rail workers cut the sabots or shoes which held down the railway lines, therefore ensuring that the trains couldn't run. 2 out of 3. Frank Muir, dicey, D-I-C-E-Y, dicey.
Wartime expression meaning dangerous.
Yep. And why?
Well, the full one was dicing with death, wasn't it?
And if a Battle of Britain pilot came back and said that that's what he'd been doing, what had he been doing?
Well, he'd been doing slow rolls at about 5 feet in altitude.
I think that's good enough, Frank. 3 marks. Dicey means something risky and dangerous. It's originally RAF slang. Nowadays, it certainly applies to any kind of risky operation. I mean, dicing down M1 or something of that sort. Yep. 3 marks. Dilys Powell, sinister.
Sinister means having an appearance of being dangerous or disagreeable.
Yes. And originally?
Actually, it comes from something to do with the left hand.
And why?
Because, something to do with auguries.
Yes.
Auguries when a bird flew in from the left, or something was a bad omen, or something of the sort.
That'll do. Sinister nowadays means of ill omen or ill-looking or wicked or malign. But as Dilys Powell rightly says, it comes from the Latin word meaning left or left-handed. And the left side was regarded as being superstitiously dangerous and of ill omen. Illegitimate child was said to be born on the left side of the bed or the wrong side of the blanket. And morganatic marriage, where a noble married a commoner, was a left-handed marriage, and so on. It gets a bit complicated because this, in fact, comes from the Greek. And the Greeks, when taking omens, faced north, and the left hand was the west or setting sun side and was jolly unlucky. The Romans, God help them, faced the other way, and they often thought that sinister was jolly lucky, but they still were obsessed with the Greek. Dennis Norden, the word snob.
Well, it means somebody who places undue importance on social position or wealth or French films, depending upon the type of snob you are. Now,
and by origin?
Well, it was a North Country word for a cobbler's or a cobbler apprentice, as in is it in Hobson's Choice?
Nowadays, somebody who apes the ways of those in a higher social position and puts an exaggerated estimate on rank and wealth and fashionable society, and probably at the same time tries to conceal his own supposedly inferior origin. The explanations for this are a bit confused. Thackeray wrote a book of snobs, and it's supposed by some that he used the word first, referring to George IV, who was known as the first gentleman of Europe, and without having all the qualities necessary, and that the snob first referred to him. But in universities, when you had a mixture, we've referred to this before, of noblemen and commoners, those who were not noblemen had after their name on the college list S. Nob, which means sine nobilitate, which means not of noble blood. But I think probably Denis's is the best explanation, which is that a snob meant a cobbler, and in those days, therefore, a rather unskilled, silly, foolish fellow. So I think that's very unfair to cobblers. And Denis, I think, earns his 3 marks. Well, then, a quickie round on abbreviations and initials. 2 marks if you get them right. Beginning with Anne Scott James. R-A-D-C.
Well, R could well be royal.
Yes.
Royal something something corps.
Yes. You wouldn't need the corps if they were all false already.
Dental.
All right, 1.5. I helped you. Royal Army Dental Corps. Frank Muir, CIA.
CIA.
Mm-hmm. Yes.
Central Information Agency.
1.5 again.
From James Bond. The
Central Intelligence Agency of the United...
Well, give or take a syllable.
of the United States of America, which used to be run by Alan Dulles, and now is run by a character whose name at the moment escapes me, and always fighting James Bond's Smirch, wasn't it? CIA, Central Intelligence Agency. Dilys Powell, more peaceful. St. John... No, I've...
What's the question?
Where does that come from?
We'll give you another. BRCS.
BRCS.
Oh, it's filthy. I wouldn't...
BRCS. British? British?
Yes. Swiss flag backwards.
Swiss flag backwards?
Brown, red, crimson, scarlet.
British Red Cross Society.
Yes, you're dead right, but I helped you quite a lot, and I give you 1 out of 2. All right, 1.5, we'll call it. 1.5. BRCS, British Red Cross Society. The one that I gave away to you was SJAB, which is St. John's Ambulance Brigade.
I should never have got it.
Dennis Norden, ICBM.
Intercontinental Ballistic Missile.
Well done. Well, now we come to the last round. And so we go back to those 2 quotations I gave the teams earlier on in the programme, so that Anne Scott James, for 2 marks, can you tell me where your quotation comes from? Just like the ivy, I'll cling to you.
I remember Leslie Henson singing a wonderful song called I Want to Cling to Ivy If Ivy Will Cling to Me, and I think it was a skit on an older song.
Yes?
Which could be this. Old song.
Do you remember the first line of this?
Oh, I didn't know you were going to ask me that.
Wait a minute.
All this studying
Just
of my
like
quotation
the
I've
ivy
been supposed
on
to do.
the old garden wall.
That's it.
Clinging so tightly, there may be fall.
That's all right.
That's lovely. What do you mean it's all right? Great hush there. You know?
Make you the force's sweetheart if you like, Dennis. I don't mind.
Sweetheart of the spent forces.
1.5, I think, out of 2. Just like the ivy I'll cling to you comes from a song written by A.J. Mills, and as Dennis quite rightly sang, just like the ivy on the old garden wall, clinging so tightly, whate'er may befall. Now, Dilys Powell, the origin of your quotation, the rank is but the guinea stamp.
Robert Burns.
Poem called?
Well, it goes on about a man's a man for all that.
It goes on for a frightful long time.
Yes,
that.
on and on.
Yes,
That.
All right, 2 marks it is.
Dirt on Caledonian night. That.
Robert Burns, the poem called For Are That and Are That. The rank is but the guinea stamp, the man's the goad for are that.
You'll get dirt too. I don't know. Accent.
Well, now I shall ask Frank and Dennis to give me their explanations of how these quotations came into being, and the marks will go to whichever unlikely explanation gets the longer amount of applause from the audience here in the studio. And so back to Denis Norden and his quotation, just like the ivy, I'll cling to you.
Well, the ladies and gentlemen here in the studio audience may find it difficult to believe, but when I was young, I was absolutely startlingly handsome. So incredibly good-looking that there was only one career possible for me, and that was to be a matinee idol. Now, you seem to find that difficult to believe, but I must impress upon you, that was before my accident. I had a nasty accident. I fell off Sir Lawrence Olivier from a height of 60 feet. I better go back to the beginning. You see, being, as I say, so beautiful, and that's the only word for it, I decided the only career was to be an actor, and I went along to the Old Vic, and I saw the manager, and he took one look at me and said, "By heaven, you're handsome." And I said, "Steady." I said, "I've come along to give you an opportunity of employing me." And he said, "Well, good looks aren't quite enough equipment for an actor." He said, "I know exactly what we'll do with you." He wasn't explicit about it, but he led me outside and pointed to the front of the Old Vic, and he said, "One day you will be up there in lights." And I said, "When?" And he said, "This afternoon." And he offered me this job of changing the signs which tell what the program is at the Old Vic, which I took, and he called Chas, and out came this elderly electrician who was called Charlie when he worked at the windmill, but Chas when he entered the intellectual environs of the Old Vic. He said, Chas, this is your new assistant, Denis Norden, a would-be actor." And Chas said, "How do you do?" He said, I never met anybody from Woodby. It's in Leicestershire." Well, I forgave him this because I thought how embarrassed he'd be when I was an international star and he was still looking for a pair of insulated pliers. And I said, "What have we got to do?" And he said, "We've got to change the sign. Come with me." And he took me down to this basement where there were hundreds of enormous cut-out letters with bulbs in them. Electric light bulbs, not tulips. And he said, "We pick out the letters for the programme for tonight." So I said, "Well, what is the programme tonight?" He said, "I'll give you a clue." With one hand he picked out the letter I, and the other he picked out the letter V. And he said, "Do you know what it is?" And I hazarded a wild guess, worm's eye view. And he said, "No, it's King Henry IV." From which you remember the famous line, "I tickle your catastrophe." He said, "We got tonight Sir Lawrence Olivier in Henry IV. And we got to put it up on the sign. Come with me." So there I was, not very much later. He had landed me the putting up of the words Sir Lawrence Olivier in, while he put up Henry IV, which was a rather unequal division of labour. But as I was new, I was landed with it. And of course there's this big, enormous iron frame into which the letters fit, and it's 60 foot high. And he said, be very careful. He said, don't lean on it at all. He said, because there's only 2 wing nuts holding it. He said, that's why we need a national theatre, more wing nuts. I said, right. And I got up as far as SIR for Sir, LAU for the start of Lawrence, and I looked down, and he'd finished his bit, and I must have been daydreaming because I thought of the moment when my name would be up there. Denis Norden, Sir Denis Norden, in Hamlet, and suddenly I heard this shriek from below, look out, it's giving way. And there was this rending sound, and the whole of the iron frame came away from the wall, and looking down, I saw Chas there. He was clinging on with one hand to the letter I, and with the other hand to the letter V. So I spread-eagled myself across the U, and as the whole thing descended to the ground, and my face was reduced to the shapeless mediocrity that it is now, my chance of becoming an international star were reduced to nothing. This wholly irrelevant thought flashed into my mind as I looked down at him. Chas likes the IV, I'll cling to you.
And now we go on to the second quotation for Frank Muir. The rank is but the guinea's stamp.
Once, about a couple of years ago, I was taken to the Earl's Court Rink, I think it was, to see the Desert Song on ice. Now, this impressed me for the sheer incongruity of the thing. The Desert Song on ice. You know, it just didn't fit at all. But I realized, say you put the Desert Song on sand, you'd have a new honesty in drama, a kind of still core of honesty, which would be a real breakthrough. I tried this, actually, during the summer. We were at Frinton-on-Sea. I got some friends to rehearse. It didn't work, actually. Through no fault of my own, I couldn't hire a cinema I had in the capital, and the tide came in. You can't really sing the riff song rolling up your trousers with your left hand, and the salt water got into the harmonium bellows. You do need music, you know. And I abandoned it. Then I thought of My Fair Lady. You know, My Fair Lady, marvellous English life, dramatised from the Irish playwright, but played on wooden boards is wrong. So I thought, how about playing My Fair Lady on nourishing stout? freeze a whole lot of stout and let them skate around and play, and you get real integrity in the drama. So I found just the place, at the back of a brewery that make the stout, there was a huge 4-acre dump full of old stout bottles. And I found by emptying out all these bottles, I could stack them and make sort of seats. And I poured all the stout into the middle where it formed a kind of lake, and I laid copper piping among that and put a sort of refrigerator. It wasn't really a refrigeration plant, it was a heat exchanger, you know, a system where you get a thing cold by heating up something else, you know, rather like a wife's feet in bed. And I fixed one of these things on, and I froze all this stout and made this shiny rink. And I thought of people, they sit on these broken bottles. And I got Albert Finney to play, not the Albert Finney, the butcher's lad at home. He's kind of a helpful coincidence and looks well on the programme. And I got him to play Professor Higgins, and I rehearsed the company, and the sets were designed by Cecil Beaton. He didn't know, but I copied them from a book of his designs. But they were designed by Cecil Beaton. I suddenly realised it is hopeless going on with this project. I'm undercapitalised. And I realised it's absolutely no good, you see. I must have the money. Because even though I've got the costumes and the performance and the skating, the rink is but the Guinness dump.
Well, a result in which there is a draw in the two stories, and it finally arrives at a result in which there is a draw in the complete programme. And that brings us to an end of this edition of My Word.
In My Word, you heard Dilys Powell, Anne Scott James, Frank Muir and Denis Norden, introduced by Jack Longland. The programme was devised by Tony Shryan and Edward J. Mason and presented by the BBC. The BBC presents My Word. And here to introduce the programme and the panel is Jack Longland.
My Word is a word game played by people whose business is words, and it comes tonight from St. Peter's Hospital, Chertsey. Those taking part are Anne Scott James, Dilys Powell, Frank Muir, and Denis Norden. Round one tries to test their vocabularies. 2 marks if they can get the meaning of these words approximately right. Beginning with Dilys Powell. Dilys, what is spume drift, or if you prefer it, spoon drift?
It's foam.
Yes?
It's kind of spin drift.
And what happens? How does it happen? How does it happen?
How did it happen? Well, it's sort of foam collects and comes ashore.
It's blown by the wind.
It's blown by the wind.
That's what I wanted.
Thank you.
All right, 2 marks it is. It's spray swept from the tops of the waves and blown along the surface of the sea. More usually called spin drift, but it can be called spume drift. 2 marks. Denis Norden, what is it? I-double-Z-A-T. Is it?
What is it? It's part of a very famous Shakespearean quotation from Macbeth. Is it a dagger I see?
No, you get nothing for that.
Is it? It couldn't be a sort of cricketing, sort of pessimistic version of "How's that?" Sort of slightly tentative. Is that?
No.
I never heard the word.
That might have been a version in, say, Pakistan, and that might help you towards the derivation.
I'm terribly rusty on my Pakistani, actually.
Well, I'm sorry. No marks.
No.
It is an Arabic word. Honour, reputation, self-respect, sometimes self-importance. Is it? Anglo-Indian phrase. Anne Scott James. What is allergic rhinitis?
Matter of fact, I've got several nasty skin patches that I was hoping I could get some free advice on after the programme. I think it's hay fever.
Hay fever it is. Sensitiveness to certain foods, pollens, insect bites, etc. Frank Muir, what is a poodle faker?
Poodle faker? Oh, a poodle faker is an Indian faker who, instead of sitting on nails, sits in a poodle. But also,
why?
It also was used, but Edwardian expression survived till the middle 20s, for a young man who spent a lot of time with girls and dolled himself up a bit of a swell, wasted his time on frivolous pursuits.
Yes, that'll do. 2 marks. Very much given to ladies' company and their tea parties and so on. Why it means this, I haven't the faintest idea. I haven't been able to find out. Well, before we begin round 2, I give each team a quotation for them to write down. And the two women members of the team will, I hope, go on studying their quotations during the programme, because at the end I shall ask them where those quotations come from. So, Dilys Powell and Frank Muir, here's your quotation. The lamps are going out all over Europe. And Anne Scott James and Denis, yours is, she was a phantom of delight. And then at the end of the programme I shall ask Frank and Denis to give me their idea of how these words came to be said or written. And so round two. Well, as this programme is coming to you from a hospital, it's only fitting that we should have a round of books written about doctors or hospitals or the medical profession generally. Quickie round, for 2 marks, who wrote the following? Dilys Powell, The Citadel.
A.J. Cronin. 2
marks, well done. Denis Norden, Not as a Stranger.
Oh, that's an American. It's Morton somebody.
Yes.
I can't for the life of me think who, though.
All right, 1 out of 2. It's Morton Thompson.
Oh.
Thompson.
Anne Scott James, Doctor in the House.
Ah, Richard Gordon.
Yes. And Frank Muir, The Doctor's Tale or The Physician's Tale.
This isn't a book, is it?
Part of the book.
By Geoffrey Chaucer.
Yeah. In
about 1200. in the Canterbury Tales.
Absolutely right. Chaucer in Canterbury Tales, the Doctor's or Physician's Tale about Appius and Virginia. Well, the next round is about verse and poetry, and on this occasion, prose as well. I give each member of each team a quotation and ask them to complete it with the next line or two. 2 marks if they can complete the quotation, and 2 more for correctly naming the source. Dilys Powell, sink me the ship, master gunner, sink her, split her in twain.
The Revenge.
Yes, by?
Tennyson?
Yes.
Tennyson. Alfred Lord Tennyson.
Yes. All right, the next line. Sink me the ship, master gunner, sink her, split her in twain.
Something rather rhyming with Maine.
Not Maine.
Oh. No, I wouldn't.
All right, 2 out of 4.
No.
The Ballad of the Revenge by Lord Tennyson, the one that starts at Flores and the Azores to which at Grenville lay. And this bit is, sink me the ship, master gunner, sink her, split her in twain, fall into the hands of God, not into the hands of Spain. Denis Norden, this is a quotation from an essay in prose this time. 4 marks if you can complete it and say who wrote it. As long as war is regarded as wicked, it will always have its fascination.
Golly. Is it Bernard Shaw?
No, but earlier, same kind of chap. Same nationality, anyway.
Irish?
Yeah.
Is it Wilde?
Yes.
Right. We're off. As long as war is regarded as wicked, however, if it is regarded as, and then there's a blank, it will never occur again.
Yes,
that's the sense.
sort of thing. Yes.
How it goes on, yeah.
2.5, I think.
Yeah.
Out of 4. As long as war is regarded as wicked, it will always have its fascination. When it's looked upon as vulgar, it will cease to be popular. It's Oscar Wilde in The Critic as Artist. Anne Scott James, the art of biography is different from geography.
Biography is about chaps and geography is about maps.
Yes, the other way around, but all right.
You're brilliant, then.
It's
really.
It's a Cleryhue.
Yes, by... You've got it
the
already.
original Cleryhue Bentley.
That's right. Yes, well done. You get your 4 marks. Biography for beginners. It's by Edward Cleryhue Bentley, who invented this particular form of rhyme called the Cleryhue. The art of biography is different from geography. Geography is about maps, but biography is about chaps. Frank Muir.
I think I should state for any listeners who can hear twitterings and chirrupings that there's a family of starlings unaccountably nesting in Dilys's hair. Or maybe in the roof of the stage. We don't want to disturb them. Let press on, Jack.
Nice noise. Well, here's yours, Frank Muir. Old nature swears the lovely dears her noblest work she classes owe.
The finest hour I ever had, it's one of these, was sporting with the lasses,
Yes?
which is by one of those rather sexy poets who, if he doesn't burst into flame, burns.
Yes. And the title of the poem?
It's Green Grow the Rushes O.
All right, it's Burns's Green Grow the Rashes. Her prentice hand she tried on man, and then she made the lasses o. Next round is origins and derivations of words or expressions or phrases, and 3 marks if members of the team can get not only the present meaning right, but the origin and derivation of that particular phrase. Beginning with Dilys Powell, the exchequer.
Well, it now means the national financial arrangement.
Yes.
It means that they used to have a cheque, but they haven't any longer.
Stick to checker.
Checker. Checkerboard.
They assessed the funds on a checkerboard.
It did. Nowadays, the Office of the Crown responsible for collecting and spending the national revenue, but originally, in Edward I's days, it was 2 things. It was the Department of State, managed by the Treasurer and the judges and some barons, much the same as the present Exchequer, but also a Court of Exchequer, looking after the revenues of the Crown and recovering debts which are due to the King. And it met with a table covered with a checkered cloth like a chessboard, and they put counters on the checkerboard and so marked and worked out the necessary transactions. It was later merged in the King's Bench Division.
Well, that's
3
nice.
out of 3. Denis Norden, Little Englander.
Well, it means somebody who has very narrow, insular views about England. And I think it came from the Boer War.
Yes. Term of contempt, or it was, a person who preferred to see England keep her own house in order and stay out of other people's quarrels and let alone empire building, not do it. An isolationist, in effect. And it was used originally during the Boer War for people who were against the Boer War, people like George Bernard Shaw and G.K. Chesterton, for example. 3 marks. Anne Scott James, weighed in the balance and found wanting.
Well, it means to fall short in your standards.
Yeah.
I should have thought it comes from what it sounds like, comes from the weighing of goods
yes, but there's a
against
particular
money.
occasion it refers to.
Is it biblical?
Yes.
The Book of Kings?
No, it's dangerous to say whether... No, I think it's later than Kings. Yes, it must be. All right.
There's a padre in the front row looking very smug here.
He's just taken out a notebook and written something, Jack.
Time of the captivity, so we're all right. 2 marks. Means, as Anne says today, tested and proved to be faulty or a failure. It comes from the writing on the wall, mene mene tekel upharsin, in the book of Daniel. And the particular bit of the phrase is tekel, which translated is supposed to mean thou art weighed in the balance and art found wanting.
In one word?
Well, that's all surprised me about this particular phrase, but I'm no Hebrew scholar, because it's even more difficult when you get further down the phrase, when you end up harsin, and then you look it up. You see, it's not upharsin at all, but peres, which means thy kingdom is divided and given to the Medes and Persians.
It used to be a very loaded language.
It's a very loaded language,
yes.
Indeed, yes. 2 out of 3. Frank Muir, it's all Tommy rot.
It's all nonsense.
Yes?
Stupid.
Mm-hmm.
What do I have to do? Complete the rhyme?
No.
I forgot
Say
what the
how
question is.
the phrase originates. Tommy rot.
Tommy Rot? Well, it's in the reign of Henry II. The first sort of independent garbage collector was called Thomas Rottingdean. They had a slogan, "Have been will travel." The origin of the phrase has been, too. And since then, rubbish has always been called Tommy Rot, which is an abbreviation. It's very well known, Jack.
Tommy can.
Not in Derbyshire, but... Well,
Tommy can.
Tommy can is a thing you cook...
Yes, now you're getting there. Yes, you're getting nearer.
Tommy Rot is something to do with food, then?
Yes.
What's your explanation?
I'll give you a mark for knowing that it means rubbish or nonsense or thoroughly inferior articles. But the explanation is that before the Truck Acts, about which you're no doubt familiar, were passed in 1831, in the North Country industry, part of the wages was often paid in food. And the miners called their food Tommy.
Why?
The food was kept...
Why do they call it Tommy?
I haven't the faintest idea.
No marks, then. On to the next round. Never heard such an implausible load of Tommy rot. And miners were half paid in food they called Tommy. Finish it, Jack. Come on, finish it. Make it sound plausible.
Yes, all right. He kept it in a Tommy can. Once you start calling the food Tommy, then Tommy can's obvious. But the food was the Tommy shop. Employers owned the shops, and they could force their employees to buy from those shops because they didn't pay them in cash, they paid them in vouchers on their own shops. And therefore, the kind of food you bought there was jolly bad, and therefore it was Tommy rot. Well, in the next round, for 2 marks, in what works by what authors would you find the following characters? Dilys Powell, Gerard Gerardson, and Margaret Brandt.
A novel.
Yes.
Not the Cricket on the Hearth.
Well,
no.
stick to the hearth. That ends all
Hearth.
right. Don't...
Oh, oyster.
All right, what about the author?
Charles Reade.
Well done. Gerard Gerardson and Margaret Brandt were 2 of the principal characters in Charles Reade's The Cloister and the Hearth. Denis Norden, Piscator, Auceps, and Venator.
Oh, is it the fishing book?
Yes.
The Complete Angler.
Yes.
The Complete Angler.
Yes.
Right.
And who are these?
Well, they're 3 fishermen. They'd better be, Jack. Otherwise, I'm in a...
No, that's right. I was trying to warn you off that slightly. But you're all right so far, except in thinking they're all fishermen.
No, they're not all fishermen, Jack. The one who sounds like a fisherman, Piscator, is a fisherman.
That's quite right.
The other 2 are non-fishermen in order that he can have straight men and to explain it all, too.
Yes, I'll give you 2 marks. They're the 3 principal characters and conversationalists in Isaac Walton's Complete Angler. Piscator is the fisherman, Auceps is the fowler, and Venator is the huntsman. Anne Scott James, Glaucus, Ione, and the blind girl, Nydia.
They're classical names.
Yes.
So they must be in a novel about either Greece or Rome.
Yes,
And I think, or rather, it's Pompeii, isn't it?
Yes, quite right.
It's The Last Days of Pompeii by Lytton, Lord Lytton.
Well done. Last Days of Pompeii. Three characters in The Last Days of Pompeii by Buller Lytton, or Lord Lytton. Frank Muir, Phineas Fletcher, and Ursula March.
Are they in Noddy and the Striptease?
Not so far as I think they've strayed a bit if they've got there.
I bet this book isn't on the library trolley. Trollop? No, I don't think she was a trollop. No, she was not with a name like that.
Well,
it isn't Lawrence Stern.
All right, no, Mark.
No.
John Halifax, Gentleman.
Oh, no.
By Mrs. Craik, who was Dinah Mulock. Well, now we come to the last round and go back to those quotations I gave the 2 teams earlier in the programme. So for 2 marks, Dilys Powell, can you give me the origin of your quotation? The lamps are going out all over Europe.
It was said by Lord Grey just at the beginning of the First World War.
Yes.
Well, just before it.
What was he referring to?
He was referring to the beginning of the war.
Mm-hmm. It was Earl Grey of Fallerden, who was Foreign Secretary at the beginning of the First World War, and this was the 3rd of August 1914. Although the declaration hadn't happened, it was perfectly clear that war was going to happen. He was standing, I think, at a window of the Foreign Office and watching the streetlights go out, and he said, "The lamps are going out all over Europe. We shall not see them lit again in our lifetime." Now, Anne Scott James, the origin, please, of your quotation. She was a phantom of delight.
It's the first line of a poem by Wordsworth.
Yes. And that's what it's called. It's as simple as all that. 2 marks. And now I shall ask Denis and Frank to give me their explanations of how these quotations came into being. And on this occasion, the marks will go to whichever unlikely explanation receives the longer amount of applause from the audience here in the theatre. So, back now to Frank Muir and his quotation, "The lamps are going out all over Europe."
One of the most gratifying things about being on a programme like this is the letters we get from listeners There's one here which I think is going to change my life. The letter reads, Dear Mr. Muir, I saw you on television recently, and I noticed those pimples you have on the right side of your face. Now, Frank, if I may make so bold, incidentally, my name's Arthur, but my friends call me Art. Well, Frank, to continue, my son Rupert, whom we call Roop, he also had big lumps like yours all over his face, but I took him to a doctor who removed them quite painlessly, and ever since he's been all right with the birds. Why don't you do the same? Yours ever, Art. Now, that letter was quite astonishing to me for two reasons. One, I didn't know that people had noticed I'd got these large pimples on the right-hand side of my face. I thought that I'd managed to conceal them. And also, of course, the second shock was to realize that they could actually be taken off. Because I've always had a fear of losing them. It wasn't a sort of virility thing like Samson, you know. But when I was very young, I remember my father telling me, when I was really quite a tiny boy, that if I unscrewed my tummy button, my bottom would fall off. And for some reason, I've always a sort of traumatic thing, and I've always had a fear that if I unscrewed a spot, my nose or something would fall off. So it's always rather terrified me. But now that Art has written this letter, and Little Roops had an entirely new life, I decided to have... In fact, on the way in, I stopped a doctor. He was off duty. He was painting a door. But, I knew he was a doctor because of his white coat. And I said, do you think you could take these spots off for me? And he said, yeah, sure, right, I think so, yeah. Alf, I said, after the show. He said, oh, fine. He said, I'll get a chisel and some sandpaper. So after the show, my whole life is going to be changed. I thought, before this letter arrived, that I'd have to go through life with my affliction. But no. And Art, if you're listening, thanks to the story of your son, in the words of Lord Grey of Falodon, the lumps are going, Art, all over your Roop.
Well, now we go on to Denis Norden. And you remember, his quotation was, she was a phantom of delight.
It's an extraordinary coincidence, actually, because my story is also about a doctor. Just before the show, we were entertained by the doctors and nurses here very royally. All the calamine lotion you could drink, actually. And I got talking to one of the doctors, actually, and I said to him, what really extraordinary cases have you had? The really most extraordinary case that I ever had, he said, was when I was absolutely raw here. He said, and suddenly in came this woman with her teenage daughter, and she said, Doctor, you've got to help me, it's my Prue. He said, well, I was very new. He said, I sort of mentally ran through Grey's Anatomy to find out what... And she said, no, she said, Prue is my daughter. She said, it's the girl here, she said, she heard a program on the wireless the other night and she can't get it out of her head. She said, look. And sure enough, this girl had one of these transistor radios that has an earpiece that you put in your ear. And there it was, stuffed tight inside her ear. And the woman said, it's been like that for 3 days. I haven't been able to get it out. She said, Doctor, please, can you do something? And I looked at the girl and I sort of tugged at this earpiece. It didn't come out, but it turned her head towards me. And She stared at me with great blank eyes. She said, no, she's listening to one of these pop programmes. She said, it's also listens to on the Light programme, these pop programmes. Also, that's a terrible part, Doctor. She doesn't care. She doesn't mind it being in there, but it's not right, is it, Doctor? She said, a girl having to undress every time she takes her jumper off, she has to take it off over a transistor. She said, it isn't. I said, well, let's just consider this calmly a moment, madam. Will you excuse me a moment? And I went round to the other block where the man is who knows possibly more about medicine than anybody in the whole county, and that's Tom, the porter. Yeah, and I said, Tom, I've got a problem. A narrow passage, something wedged in it, what does one do? He said, well, when we had it with the waste pipe, he said, a bloke came out and squirted water from underneath. I said, in this case, it's absolutely impractical. I said, but you'd better come back with me. And we went back, and this girl was still there and still had this thing stuck in. And Mother said, she's still listening now. Suddenly, I had an inspiration. I said to Tom, give me the number 4 forceps. He said, the number 4? I said, yes, the ones with the overlapping grip. And he gave them to me. And I waited till the girl's attention was diverted, and I reached forward and made one quick movement. There was about 30 seconds absolute hush, and the girl gave a shriek, clapped her hand to her ear, wrenched out the earpiece and collapsed sobbing in her mother's arms. Her mother went out with a look of mute worship in her eyes, and Tom said to me, what did you do? I said, simple enough. I said, I simply reached over with the forceps and switched over to the home service. I said, I knew that would do it. 30 seconds of culture was about all she could tolerate. It became intolerable, and she wrenched it out. He said, but how did you know that would do it? I said, I just simply studied the symptoms, Tom. She was a fan, Tom, of the light.
Denis Norden wins the contest of the stories, and his team, that is Anne Scott James and Denis Norden, also win the entire contest by 2.5 marks. And that also brings to an end this edition of My Word.
In My Word, you heard Dilys Powell, Anne Scott James, Frank Muir and Denis Norden, introduced by Jack Longland. The programme was devised by Tony Shryan and Edward J. Mason and presented by the BBC. The BBC presents My Word. And here to introduce the programme and the panel is Jack Longland.
My Word is a word game played by people whose business is words, and those taking part are Anne Scott James, Dilys Powell, Frank Muir, and Denis Norden. Here's round one, to try and test their vocabulary. 2 marks if they can get the meaning of these words right. Beginning with Anne Scott James. Anne, the meaning of the word recrudescent, R-E-C-R-U-D-E-S-C-E-N-T, recrudescent.
It means busting out all over, really.
Yes.
Or re-busting out all over.
That's it. And applied normally to what?
I should think if you sort of cut a tree off in half and it started putting out new leaves, you'd say, my plane tree is recrudescent, wouldn't you?
That's right. Yes, that's good. 2 marks it is. Breaking out again, it can refer to a disease or a sore or a epidemic. Or it can refer to conflict or discontent in the figurative sense. Well done, 2 marks. Frank Muir. The meaning of the word androgynous, A-N-D-R-O-G-Y-N-O-U-S, androgynous.
Yes, it means a morbid fear of buttercups.
It might, among other things.
Well, it's been whispered in my... I scarcely can bring myself to say it. Can I bring somebody else? It's, Dilys seems to think it's both men and women.
Yes, it is.
Married couple.
No, it has to be one. It's something...
Hermaphroditic.
That's it. Something unites the characters of both sexes, hermaphrodite, and in order to save your blushes, Frank, it's mostly used botanically. It means plants which have got pistil and stamen in the same flower or plant.
Oh, plants are filthy. Some of those diagrams.
All right, you get 2 marks. Dilys Powell, the meaning of the word eclectic.
Choosing. Choosy.
Yes, that's a bit of it. It isn't quite enough, I think, Dilys.
Not enough?
Mm-hmm.
Well, picking out, it means some...
The eclectic philosophers?
Well, they picked out from the possibilities of philosophy.
Mm-hmm. The things that...
The things that yes.
That's it. Yes, I get you 2 marks. This is often misused as a word.
Not by us.
Well, very nearly. Originally, it was an ancient philosopher who selected the doctrines which appealed to him in every school of philosophy, and there was a school called the eclectic philosophers. Nowadays, it means somebody who is not exclusive or dogmatic in his opinion or his taste, but who borrows freely from various opinions and various sources. And this is often, as I say, slightly misused. 2 marks. Denis Norden, what is a frit fly? F-R-I-T-F-L-Y. Frit fly.
F-R-I-T?
Yeah.
Well, it looks like a non-U fruit fly. A frit is what they call chips in France, actually. So if you were eating, if you had some chips on your lap in France, and they soaked through the paper, when you got up, you'd have a frit fly.
It's a beautiful picture, but it won't do.
I'm no good on bugs.
A blue bottle. Perhaps it's a blue bottle.
Perhaps it's a blue bottle, or perhaps it isn't a blue bottle.
It's a small fly which is destructive to wheat and, I think, oats. Tiny, shiny, and black. And it lays eggs in the plant, and they hatch maggots, and they feed on the shoots and on the growing ears, and you don't get any oats or any porridge, or any wheat or any bread. No marks at all. Well, before we begin round 2, I give each team a quotation for them to write down, and I want the 2 women members of our teams to study them, and at the end of the programme, I shall ask them where those quotations come from. So, beginning with Anne Scott James and Denis Norden, here's your quotation. United we stand, divided we fall. And Dilys Powell and Frank Muir, yours is a rose is a rose is a rose is a rose. And then at the end of the programme, I shall ask Denis and Frank to give me their ideas of how these words came to be said or written. Round 2 is a quickie round. I want to know for 2 marks who wrote the following works. Anne Scott James, Morning Becomes Electra.
Eugene O'Neill.
Yes, 2 marks. Frank Muir, the Threepenny Opera.
Oh, this was a rewrite of an English musical show called Half a Sixpence. Or The Beggar's Opera.
The Beggar's Opera, yes.
It was written by Bertolt Brecht and Kurt Weill.
That's right. Absolutely right, and I'm glad you said those names with sufficient reverence. Dilys Powell, Tamburlaine.
Marlowe.
Christian name?
Christopher.
I didn't mean Tamburlaine's Christian name, sorry. 2 marks
Charlie,
it is. And Denis Norden, 6 characters in search of an author.
Pirandello.
Well done. 2 marks it is. Absolutely full score. Well, the next round's all about verse and poetry, and I give each member of each team a quotation and ask them to complete it by the next line or two. 2 marks if they can complete the quotation, and 2 more for correctly naming its source. Beginning with Anne Scott James. Good name in man and women, dear my lord, is the immediate jewel of their souls.
Well, I would say Shakespeare at a venture.
Yeah, isn't it he who steals my purse steals trash?
Quite right.
Who? Who was it? Iago.
Yes.
Oh, you are clever.
In
Othello, even I can do
all right,
that.
that'll do. Yes, you get your 4 marks. Good name in man and woman, dear my lord, is the immediate jewel of their souls. Who steals my purse steals trash. 'Tis something, nothing. 'Twas mine, 'tis his, and has been slave to thousands. But he that filches from me my good name robs me of that which not enriches him and makes me poor indeed. 4 marks. Frank Muir. At me you smiled, but unbeguiled, I saw the snare, and I retired. And some leagues further on come the lines, kind hearts are more than coronets.
Lady Clara Vere de Vere.
Yes, come on.
By Alfred Lord, Bridge, Croquet, Tennyson.
Good.
And the poem?
Lady Clara Vere de Vere.
Yes. At me you smiled, but unbeguiled, I saw the snare, and I retired. The daughter of 100 earls, you are not one to be desired. Tennyson's Lady Clara Vere de Vere. Now, Dilys Powell. The ice was here, the ice was there, the ice was all around.
It cracked and growled.
Yes.
And roared and howled like noises in a swound.
Yes.
Ancient mariner.
Absolutely right. 4 marks you get. The ice was here, the ice was there, the ice was all around. It cracked and growled and roared and howled like noises in a swound. Coleridge's Ancient Mariner. Denis Norden. The sons of the prophet are brave men and bold and quite unaccustomed to fear.
Where's that song?
Yeah.
And the bravest by far, the song was Abdul the Bulbul.
Yeah.
I don't know. It was sung by a man called Frank Crummett.
That's
It
better.
was, yeah.
And written by?
Don't know.
Yeah, quite right. Nobody does.
Wasn't that bright of me not to know?
All right, 4 marks. The sons of the prophet are brave men and bold and quite unaccustomed to fear, but the bravest by far in the ranks of the Shah was Abdul the Bulbul Amir. All right, on to the next round. I want to know in which Shakespeare plays the following female characters play leading parts. Beginning with Anne Scott James, Rosalind, or if you prefer it, Rosalind.
As you like it.
Yep, 2 marks. Frank Muir, Beatrice.
No, it's not as you like it, because you wouldn't have 2 at once. Beatrice, yeah. It's one of the pastorally ones, isn't it?
Well, is it?
All's well.
No.
Let's measure.
No, not all's well, no.
No, it's measure. I can never remember. Measure for measure.
Much ado about nothing.
Yes, 2 marks.
It's a pure guess.
Much ado about nothing. Dilys Powell, Cordelia.
King Lear.
2 marks. Denis Norden, Miranda.
Tempest.
Yes, and also
Somebody in
Belloc.
the audience is doing the Tempest.
Well done. Correct all the way through. Well, the next round's about foreign language expressions which have come to be used in English, mainly expressing a certain state or condition or opinion. 2 marks if you tell me what the following mean. Beginning with Anne Scott James, O tempora, O mores.
Oh, it's generally gloomy expression. Oh, times, oh, customs, which means how everything's going to the dogs.
Since?
Latin.
Since?
Since the better times past.
Yes. Do you remember?
Do
you remember who it came from?
Laudator tempora acti would say it if I might show off a bit.
Yes, that's it. Do you remember the author? It doesn't matter. I'll mark you without that.
I should think Virgil.
No.
Horace.
Yes, Horace.
Yes, Horace.
Well done. 2 marks you get. It means, the times and manners, they've all gone to pot, as compared with the days when I was a young man. And it comes from the Latin poet Horace. Frank Muir, verbum sat sapienti, or verb sap for short.
Well, I knew the short, I didn't know the long. Verb sap. It means nuff said.
Yes.
Well, does it or doesn't it?
It gets there more or less in the end. I'd like a slightly more accurate translation.
Yes, a word to the wise is sufficient. It's not as good as a wink to a blind drunk, you know.
That's all right. 2 marks it is. A word to the wise is enough, otherwise a wise man can take a hint. Dilys Powell, cordon bleu.
Well, it means a blue ribbon in cooking.
But why?
Because good cooks were given blue ribbons.
Very rarely in my experience.
They went to a school which was called the Cordon Bleu. Did they?
But it comes from?
It's a kind of order.
Yes, I'm getting that.
It's an order.
Do you remember which it was?
The bath?
No, the bath.
The garter.
Yes.
The garter.
The garter in this country. It's anything first class of the highest distinction, and nowadays it's most frequently applied to cooking and sometimes to the cooks themselves. But it was originally the blue ribbon worn by the Knights Grand Cross of the Order of the Holy Ghost, which was the highest order of chivalry under the Bourbon monarchy, rather equivalent to our garter. Denis Norden, a posteriori.
Oh, Lord.
And be careful.
It's terribly difficult to explain. It means from behind.
Yes.
Now, wait a minute. If you present an a posteriori case, you are taking a set of facts and drawing from them a general conclusion.
Yes.
As against if you're arguing a priori.
Yes.
When you take a particular circumstance and say what generally happens in this case is so and so, therefore we presume it's going to happen here as well.
Absolutely right. Yes. Well done. 2 marks it is. It means, in Latin, from what comes after, it means arguing from effect to cause. That is, by induction. This is all Sherlock Holmes stuff. That's that kind of reasoning. Exactly the opposite of a priori, which reasons from cause to effect by deduction. So, a posteriori works backwards from the result to the cause, while a priori works forward from the original cause to the eventual effect. Well, now we come to the last round and go back to those quotations I gave the 2 teams earlier on in the programme. 2 marks, please. Anne Scott James, can you give me the origin of your quotation, which was, united we stand, divided we fall?
I think it's a fable.
Yes?
Which presumably means it's Aesop.
Yes, it is. I think that's good enough. Do you remember what the characters were?
Well, I was trying to work it out. There were a lot of animals in it.
Yes.
Always are, yeah.
Lambs and a lion.
A lion, I'll give you a marks for getting one of the characters right. 2 marks it is. It's the lion and the 4 oxen, who, as long as they stuck around together, the lion couldn't get at. And then he began telling one oxen dirty stories about the other one, and one ox, rather. And so they began separating and gloomy in corners by themselves, and the lion ate them up one after the other. 2 marks. Now, Dilys Powell, the origin of your quotation, which is simple in its make-up. A rose is a rose, is a rose, is a rose.
Gertrude Stein.
Gertrude Stein. You don't remember what the book was. It isn't essential.
No, I wouldn't.
All right. Gertrude Stein.
Topless cookbook.
Gertrude Stein, a very controversial American author who lived in Paris most of her life, and this was a book called Sacred Emily. 2 marks. Well, now I shall ask Frank and Denis to give me their explanation of how these quotations came into being, and on this occasion the marks will go to whichever incredible explanation receives the longer amount of applause from the audience here in the theatre. So back to Denis Norden with his line, "United we stand, divided we fall."
Well, in this country we celebrate the anniversary of the Magna Carta, but one right which the Magna Carta did bequeath us was the right to appeal to the sovereign in any case where the individual felt himself in dire distress. And that appeal I'm going to make now through the magic of radio. Your Majesty, I would like to humbly draw your attention to a radio program called My Word, which for many years has furnished the necessities of life for 4 of your loyal subjects and 1 loyal object. And this program was devised and is compiled every week by another subject of yours, slightly fatter than any of the others, called Edward J. Mason, who is known as Ted by those of us who love him as much as he does. Now, Ted, for many these long years, has toiled through the dictionaries and the books of quotations in order to make this program, which is now heard in every English-speaking country in the world, and one of the very few BBC programs which is broadcast in the Soviet Union. When the news came about this, Ted came flying in very excited, and he said, "This should do it. We're earning rubles for the old country." He said, "We are exporting words. This should do it." So I said, "Do what?" He said, "Get me my knighthood." He said, "It's what I've worked for all my life, Sir Edward Mason." So his anxiety was understandable when the last honours list was published, and he came flying in to me with his beard waving like a ferret's hip in a high wind. And he said, "Will you look at this?" And he thrust this paper in front of me. He said, "Look what they've done." Nothing. He said, "Very well, I give the nation fair warning. Unless I get a knighthood in the next honours list, then I'm withdrawing the programme." So now we come to what they refer to in the potato crisp commercials as the crunch. Unless Ted feels that sword on his shoulder, then for 4 of your loyal subjects there is only the prospect of penury and possibly having to go to work. Comes at a time of dire financial difficulty for all of us. Dilys Powell is just about to pay the last payment on her new motorbike. So, Your Majesty, if you could somehow bring yourself to allow him this honour, I don't think it could be better put than it was put those many years ago by that grand old Greek Aesop, leader of that swinging group, the Fables, when he said, "Your Majesty, you knight Ted, we stand. Defy Ted, we fall."
I've just seen Ted leaving control room to get his frock coat cleaned. Well, now we go on to the other line, which is Frank Muir's, and if you remember, that was, "A rose is a rose is a rose is a rose."
I don't know if you're interested in literary mysteries, but that line, "A rose is a rose is a rose is a rose," written by Gertrude Stein. when you consider a rubbishy line like that, apparently means nothing, written by Gertrude Stein, and when you think of the Stein family, when you think of her brothers, Epp, the sculptor, Ein, the mathematician, Hammer, who wrote the musical comedy. The world is full of the Stein family, and there's all these brilliant men, and there's their sister, Gertrude. Then I thought, you know, suppose it's a very important line, which has only been spoken perhaps centuries ago, and handed down from foot to mouth throughout the generations. And she had been the first one to write it down. Had she, in fact, written something down which was phonetically the same as a rose, is a rose, is a rose, is a rose, but was actually not said quite like that? I brooded over this. Next few years, I studied up the subject. I read all about ancient Rome. I suddenly found a clue. And it appeared that when Nero retired, he retired to a villa outside Rome. And this set me thinking, if Nero retired to a villa, what does an old retired civil servant do with his time? He grows roses. See, and this suddenly connected up with this. Was there a clue here, I thought? And I learnt the truth, and it's really rather interesting. She had corrupted that line, you know. See, what happened was this. Nero retired from the job, Rome was in ashes, and he retired to his villa. It was his ambition, before he died, to grow 2 rows of roses. But of course he was on the sunny side of the hill, and nothing would grow under the hot Italian sky. Now, he had a slave, an angle. They all did, you see. You've got all sorts of angles, depending which part of England they came from. If they came from near London or Brum, they were acute angles. But if they came from the country, they were obtuse angles. And some of them weren't actually captured, but they were sort of washed ashore from boats in the rough sea off the south of Italy. They were wrecked angles, but they weren't... there's no good talking to them because they're very square. No, Nero's slave, his name was Isosceles, was from the country, and he was an obtuse angle. And Nero said to him, if you can help me grow these roses, so they, instead of just dying, they actually rise out of the ground, I will give you your freedom. So the old obtuse angle, old Isosceles thought about it, and he tried everything. He tried putting manure on them. Then he realized that the sun was the problem. He said, well, we in England, we mulch them, you see. So he went round and got hay, and he very carefully mulched the first row of these would-be glorious red roses. But being a very obtuse angle, while he was mulching the first row, he was treading on the second row, and he killed them off. But rather than confess his fault to Nero and be decapitated, he sneaked out that night to a man called Cicero. It wasn't the Cicero, it was a Fred Cicero. He was a retired orator on the shady side of the hill, and Cicero grew the only yellow roses in Rome. And our old Isosceles, he dug up in the middle of the night a complete row of Cicero's roses and planted them in Nero's garden and mulched them with straw. Now, the following day, Isosceles went on his fortnight's holiday to Pisa. He always went to Pisa because he had a leaning to architecture. Now, when he came back, he was all agog to see how his roses had done, and it was night time, and old Nero had retired to bed, but there was a tablet with an inscription on it, and the slave realized that the roses had come up, but Nero had suspected that there'd been a fiddle, and then the slave realized that he put yellow roses in among Nero's red. And what Nero had written on the tablet was simply, a rose is a rose is a rose is a rose. You see, if you say it quickly. What he actually said was, our roses have come up. But isn't one of the lines of them roses belonging to our neighbour, Cicero? You see, what he said, if you say it slowly, was, Our roses, a rose is a rose, Cicero.
Well, by your vote, Frank Muir just wins the contest of the stories with Denis Norden, and that brings us to a final score in which, nevertheless, Anne Scott James and Denis Norden win by 1/2 of a mark from Dilys, Powell and Frank Muir, and this also brings to an end this edition of My Word.
In My Word, you heard Dilys Powell, Anne Scott James, Frank Muir and Denis Norden, introduced by Jack Longland. The programme was devised by Tony Shryan and Edward J. Mason and presented by the BBC.